Who is Victor Walker, and what's his connection to her? Annie Reeves suddenly felt suspicious. She quickened her pace, frantically dashing into the main road, waving for a taxi. Are you trying to get yourself killed? A taxi screeched to a halt, the driver angrily stopping right in front of her. She stammered an apology, climbed into the cab, and hurriedly gave the address. The driver, looking at her pale face, roared in frustration. Her home wasn't far from the office. She usually walked, but the taxi ride would only take 15 minutes. The elevator was stopped on the 12th floor. She stood there, blowing on her hands to warm them. Ting, the elevator doors opened. She walked in with her head down, bumping straight into someone coming out. What's the rush, huh? Off to meet your maker. The all-day rain had put everyone in a foul mood. Without looking up, she pressed the button to close the doors, staring at the numbers as they lit up, counting each floor. Her apartment was on the 20th floor of Building A. She had just moved into this apartment last year, everything was still brand new. The largest room was her study, where all her papers and documents were kept on the bookshelves. Her marriage certificate, her most valuable possession, was kept in the bottom drawer. Carefully, she retrieved the pink folder containing the 2 copies. She slowly opened it. They had rushed to register their marriage that day, unaware they needed a photo together. They'd taken a quick snapshot right there at the marriage registration office, without changing clothes or putting on makeup. Both of them wore serious, stiff expressions, looking more like comrades who had faced death together than a newly married couple. The her of 4 years ago was truly a girl, innocent and naive. Victor Walker, 5 years her senior, was already a shrewd and mature man, his eyes sharp and confident. Her cold fingers traced the photograph. Holding her breath, she wondered, was the man beside her truly her husband? Clutching the 2 marriage certificates, she bolted out the door before even closing the drawer. Only when she reached the elevator did she realize she'd forgotten her umbrella. Outside the upscale residential complex, taxis were plentiful. She didn't have to endure the downpour for long before hailing one. Victor Walker's office in Lu Chiao district, she told the driver. Ah, you mean Red Street, the driver quipped. Red Street was the locals' nickname for Xianjiang Road, densely packed with government buildings. The Commission, the Court, the Department of Justice, the Public Security Bureau, and most other departmental branches were located there. The first building on the street was a 24-story administrative office, where Victor Walker's office occupied the first 4 floors. The streetlights had just come on, and the rain-washed avenue gleamed like a mirror, reflecting the ancient trees lining both sides. It was quiet here, the cars moving slowly and deliberately. No birdsong could be heard. Annie Reeves got out of the taxi and stepped onto the stairs. Under the gloomy sky, Victor Walker's office was brightly lit. Groups of employees were engrossed in blueprints or hunched over their computers, none of them noticing Annie Reeves standing at the door. She stood there, neither pushing the door open nor speaking, her hands tightly gripping the 2 marriage certificates. The person inside suddenly looked up, gazing towards the office right next to the stairs. On the stairs, a man in a black shirt, exuding an air of composure, strode quickly down. He glanced around, about to say something, when he suddenly noticed a frail figure outside the door. She saw him step towards her in surprise, and everyone around followed his gaze towards her. Annie Reeves slowly brought her hand to her chest. It was Victor Walker, her husband of 4 years, it was him. The feeling of being shot wasn't painful anymore, but rather, comforting. Finally, she owed him nothing more. Annie Reeves sighed in relief, a small smile playing on her lips. Naomi Bennett suddenly sighed, saying she didn't know how good she had it. Victor Walker was obviously superior. William Carter was always trailing behind the director, bowing and scraping like a grandson. Just past 30, he'd started getting fat and bald, a truly sorry sight. Victor Walker, on the other hand, commanded respect, with his thick hair, tall frame, and extraordinary presence. Naomi Bennett spoke these words with warmth, her eyes shining with particular pride. Now that Annie Reeves thought about it, Naomi Bennett's words back then had been laced with hidden meaning, she just hadn't realized it. It's not that the enemy is too strong, but that our side is too useless. But who would have thought? Naomi Bennett was her good friend, and Victor Walker and William Carter were also good friends. Your friend's wife is off limits. That's an old saying, it doesn't apply to this day and age anymore. Like a line from a song, the ones closest to us are the ones who hurt us the most. Hurt, so what? For William Carter, maybe so. Losing both his wife and his friend, a heavy loss. For her, it wasn't quite like that, but a liberation. From now on, she had the right to live for herself. Annie Reeves smirked, a relaxed and cheerful expression appearing on her face. At the intersection, people and vehicles trailed one after another in long lines, umbrellas in the night like blooming flowers, dazzling the eyes. The light turned green. Annie Reeves absently wiped the rain from the corner of her eye and walked straight ahead. After a few steps, she felt as if she had stepped on something slippery, and her whole body lurched forward. The light turned red. A passing car splashed water right in front of her. She tried to steady herself, but she couldn't. Flustered, she closed her eyes and fell onto the road. A sharp screech of brakes pierced the air. She looked up in terror at the car that had stopped right in front of her, practically face to face. Her hands went limp. The driver's scalp tingled with fear. Through the windshield, he saw a tangled mess of hair fluttering in the wind, close enough to touch. For a moment, time seemed to stop, space solidified. He couldn't gauge the severity of the situation. He regained his composure and opened the car door. "Miss, can you stand up?" The man rushed to Annie Reeves' side. I. Her teeth chattered, partly from the cold, partly from sheer terror. "I think I can." She braced herself against the car, struggling to stand. The rain made her blink repeatedly. The man extended a hand, gently supporting her, his gaze kind. Standing up and taking a few steps, she felt only raindrops on her forehead, not blood. "I'll take you to the hospital." Annie Reeves's reaction reassured the man somewhat, but he was still concerned. Her pallor worried him, perhaps she had internal injuries. "No need. It was my fault, I fell. It has nothing to do with you." Annie Reeves nodded at the man, pushing his hand away. Looking at the mud-caked car, she sighed. "Is your car all right?" His car was an SUV, and a luxurious one at that. The man looked at her in surprise. "This car is tough, unless you're some kind of heavy artillery. Where do you live?" "I'll take you home." "No need." The car was fine, she was fine, everything was fine. The rain intensified, pouring down on them both. For a moment, they stood in silence, the curious onlookers having dispersed. "Here's my card. If you feel unwell, call me, anytime." He offered Annie Reeves his business card. Annie Reeves straightened up, waving him off. "Don't make a big deal out of this. I'm really fine." With that, she merged into the crowd, her gait slightly unnatural, perhaps she'd twisted her ankle. The man stared after her, surprised, then let out a breath and turned back to his car. His foot struck something. He looked down. 2 pink covers, warped by the rain and mud. Taking care of herself was simple enough. She didn't even spend all her own salary, so what did she need from him? Even during busy holidays, Victor Walker would set aside his work and accompany her to her mother's house for a couple of days. She had no siblings, no father. Her only remaining family was her mother, who lived in a small town near Tanjong City and had just retired that year. The winter of her freshman year of college, her father hanged himself with a rope in the garage. Such a small rope, yet it could bear her 80-kilogram father's weight. Life was so fragile. A lifetime of teaching, a gentle and upright man, yet he chose that way to end his life. Those who knew her father sighed and shook their heads, saying it was a pity. Her mother came from a large family of 5 sisters. Her grandmother gave birth to Uncle James Walker at 40. He was only 8 years older than Annie and was thoroughly spoiled by his mother and sisters. Annie Reeves had known from a young age that she had to yield to Uncle James Walker in everything. Uncle James Walker didn't like studying and barely managed to graduate high school. He then went into business with some friends. Unexpectedly, he turned out to be a good businessman, and after a few years, he had earned a considerable amount of money. Gradually, he felt that the scale of his shop was too small, so he wanted to open the largest public bathhouse in Tanjong City. Somehow, a sauna craze had sprung up there, and public bathhouses were popping up all over Tanjong City like mushrooms. Uncle James Walker saw an opportunity. The profits from his previous few years weren't enough, so he borrowed from several sources, and finally, the public bathhouse opened. Initially, business boomed, drawing all the customers from other saunas on the street. The other sauna owners, feeling slighted, hired some thugs to harass and provoke Uncle James Walker. Somehow, knives got involved, and Uncle James was pinned down, a blade at his throat. Her father, visiting at the time, saw this and rushed in to pull him away. In the chaos, the knife plunged into a thug's chest, killing him from blood loss. That night, her father and Uncle James were thrown into jail, and the sauna was sealed. The court sentenced her father to 10 years, and Uncle James Walker to life, as the murder weapon was his. Her mother, near madness, ran everywhere seeking help, preparing to appeal. Her father was a teacher, her mother a factory worker, they had no connections. Annie Reeves, then just 19, cried constantly, riding home with her mother every night, fearing something might happen to her. Her roommate, Naomi Bennett, was the kindest to her. Outgoing and beautiful, Naomi had caught the eye of William Carter, a 4th-year student, as soon as she started freshman year. They quickly fell into a passionate love affair. Hearing about Annie's family from Naomi, William remembered Victor Walker, a construction engineering master's student. Victor's father, Principal Dean Walker, was the Chief Justice of the Tanjong City High Court. William often played ball with Victor and they were quite close. So, William brought Annie, her eyes swollen and red from crying, to Victor's room. Raised strictly within the confines of government housing, Victor was more reserved and mature than his peers. The Walker family had a strict rule: separate public and private matters. Due to the nature of Principal Dean Walker's work, no one in the family interfered with his affairs. Annie poured out her story, her words punctuated by sobs. Normally, Victor would have said, "Sorry, this is beyond my ability," or cut her off before she finished. That day was strange. After Annie finished, Victor said nothing. But that night, he took her to his home. Sitting in the Walker family's living room, Annie heard Principal Dean Walker furiously scolding Victor, his harsh words making her want to flee. Victor persistently defended Mr. Try, Annie's father, his voice calm and steady. Finally, the study door opened. Principal Dean Walker approached Annie. "I know your father is a respected, upstanding teacher, a man of integrity. While this was an accident, the consequences are severe. Imprisonment is unavoidable. I'll try to get him house arrest, sparing him the hardship of a labor camp. This is the best I can do." Tearfully, Annie thanked him profusely. Keeping her father away from other prisoners, lessening his humiliation, was the best outcome she could hope for. She dared not ask for more. Victor Walker drove Annie Reeves back to school, the journey passed in silence. Downstairs at the girls' dormitory, Annie Reeves looked at him shyly, saying he'd been scolded by his father because of her. Victor Walker laughed, "Being chewed out by my old man is nothing new. He won't actually do anything to me. I'm his son, after all." The moon was bright, its light illuminating Victor Walker's face. Annie Reeves looked up, realizing how handsome he looked like this. And so, they became acquainted. The construction bureau wasn't far from the construction academy, so William Carter visited every Sunday. When Naomi Bennett saw him, she acted like a long-separated couple finally reunited, her behavior making everyone blush. Annie Reeves and her roommates had to excuse themselves and leave. William Carter was incredibly gentle and caring. Rarely was a man so thoughtful and sensitive. He even remembered Naomi Bennett's period. Knowing she often felt unwell during those days, he'd bring her blood-enriching foods. The architectural firm's projects were usually far away, so Victor Walker rarely returned. Whenever he did, he'd visit Annie Reeves, his face tanned from the sun, his body stronger and more robust than before. They often ate out together, strolled through the campus gardens, and occasionally caught a movie. Each time, Annie Reeves insisted on paying, thinking it would ease her conscience. She didn't dare owe Victor Walker anything more. Seeing her like this, Victor Walker was both amused and exasperated. That Sunday, Naomi Bennett didn't return to the dorm until past midnight. She sat on her bed, giggling to herself. The sound sent chills down Annie Reeves' spine. "What's up?" she asked. She climbed onto Annie Reeves' bed, leaned close to her ear, and whispered, "Annie, have you and Victor Walker done it yet?" "Done what?" Annie Reeves asked, puzzled. Naomi Bennett giggled. "You know, had sex." Annie Reeves blushed instantly and shoved her. "Don't talk nonsense. Victor Walker and I aren't even dating. Have you and William Carter, you know, done it?" Her heart trembled with fear. Naomi Bennett nodded, her eyes shining. "Yeah. It hurt at first, but it was amazing after." "Oh my God. Aren't you afraid of getting pregnant?" Annie Reeves stammered, trembling. "We use protection. William Carter, he loves me very much." Naomi Bennett closed her eyes, her voice languid. In the darkness, Annie Reeves remained silent. She turned over and reached out, touching Annie Reeves' tears. Annie Reeves stammered, unsure what to say. "I know you miss Victor Walker," Naomi Bennett said, hugging her sympathetically. "Silly girl, William Carter said you're the first girl Victor Walker has ever dated. If you're not lovers, are you siblings? How could she possibly be a match for Victor Walker? Victor Walker pitied her, helped her, he was her benefactor. Since the beginning of their junior year, William Carter had been pulling strings, wanting Naomi Bennett to stay in Xianjiang City. Annie Reeves and her classmates weren't thinking that far ahead yet, their heads buried in their studies. On National Day, they had a long break. Naomi Bennett went to William Carter's apartment to enjoy their private world. The other students went home. Annie Reeves stayed at school while her mother went back to her hometown to visit an aunt for a change of scenery. Victor Walker came to visit her and found her in the library. They had lunch together at the academy cafeteria. After lunch, the weather suddenly changed, and heavy rain poured down relentlessly. Since they couldn't go anywhere, Victor Walker returned to her room with her to listen to music and chat. Neither of them were particularly talkative, and after a few exchanges, they fell silent, their eyes meeting. Victor Walker's usually cold gaze suddenly became heated. In the small, confined space, they were close enough to touch, their heads leaning against each other, able to hear each other's breathing. Outside, thunder rumbled, and the rain poured down, creating a dark and gloomy atmosphere. From the next room, they could hear the loud laughter of men and women playing cards. "Where's your bed?" "I've been driving for hours and I'm a bit tired," Victor Walker said suddenly. Annie Reeves hurriedly tidied up the books, clothes, and other items on her bed. A few pieces of her underwear fell to the floor, and she was so embarrassed she almost stopped breathing. Victor Walker smiled, picked them up for her, took off his shoes, and lay down on the bed. "Come here and talk to me," Victor Walker said, turning to her with a smile, noticing her lingering anxiety. For a moment, she hesitated. She knew what would happen if she went over there. She wasn't overly conservative or rigid in her actions. It was just that some things Naomi Bennett and William Carter could do, but she and Victor Walker couldn't. They weren't lovers, there was no reason for them to do such a thing. But she didn't dare refuse, as if doing so would be wronging Victor Walker. Victor Walker's kindness towards her was like an invisible rope, tightly binding her, making her unable to move. She timidly walked to the side of the bed and sat down. Victor Walker embraced her, pulling her into his chest. She looked at Victor Walker's face close to hers, her breathing quickening. His warm lips began to trail down from her mouth, and at the same time, he placed her hand between his legs. She touched his hardness, for the first time realizing the stark difference between men and women. She wanted to run, to struggle, to push him away. No, you can't. You have to repay this man. You owe him so much. Only when you've repaid him in full, when you no longer owe him anything, will you have the right to live for yourself, a voice sighed within her. Victor Walker's deep eyes darkened. His long fingers undressed her, and she trembled beneath him like a naked child. He quickly removed his own clothes, their skin touching, both of them trembling intensely. When he finally broke through her resistance, she cried. He assumed it was because of the pain, so he kissed her tenderly and comforted her, unaware that there was already someone else in her heart. Men and women understand each other best in that way, not through roundabout words, but by getting straight to the point. But she wasn't successful. Victor Walker, somewhat sobered, stopped her next move. Naomi, you're drunk. Victor Walker sat up, pushing her away, his voice laced with anger. No, I'm not drunk, Victor Walker. I know exactly what I'm doing. Please, let me. I'm ready for you. Ignoring everything, she fumbled with her clothes, pulling at his hand. Victor Walker pulled his hand back. Naomi, you're drunk. Let me drive. He leaned over and opened the car window. A gust of cold wind and rain sprayed in, making Naomi Bennett shiver involuntarily. I told you, I didn't drink. If you feel uncomfortable in the car, we can go to a hotel. Naomi Bennett gripped his hand tightly, refusing to let go. Don't you remember that night in Beijing? You held me all night, comforting me so tenderly. You clearly felt something. Why are you avoiding it? No man can resist a beautiful woman, unless he's not normal. It's just a veneer of morality, rotten underneath, isn't it? Just waiting to be ripped away. She pressed her lips hard against his. Victor Walker turned his head, his brows furrowing. That incident doesn't need to be brought up again. It was an accident. Naomi Bennett lifted her head, laughing coldly. If it's not mentioned, it didn't happen. You dismiss it with a single word, accident. Let me tell you, I don't see it that way. You said you'd do whatever I wanted. Because of those words, I divorced William Carter. Victor Walker silently pushed her away, opened the car door, and stepped out. The drizzle sprayed against him, his expression suddenly icy. Say something. Talk to me. Naomi Bennett followed him out, embracing him from behind. I'll love you 100, 1,000 times more than Annie Reeves. Look, it's so late and no one's checked on us, not a single phone call. She doesn't care, she doesn't know how to love. Enough. Victor Walker roared softly, his face pale. I said I'd take care of you because of William Carter, nothing else. You're overthinking it. From now on, we won't see each other again. I won't work with your company either. Get in the car, I'll take you home. Naomi Bennett suddenly panicked, her lips white. Victor Walker, please don't be so cruel. I know I was impulsive. I won't pressure you, but I'll wait. As long as you're willing to love me, even as a mistress, I won't mind. If you don't cooperate with my company, I'll lose everything. Tears suddenly streamed down her face. Victor Walker closed his eyes heavily, his hands clenching into fists. "Alright, let's talk about this later. We've both had too much to drink." "Yes, yes. Actually, nothing happened." "I'll bring the documents to your office tomorrow, okay?" she asked fearfully. "If you can maintain a professional attitude, then yes. If not, have someone else contact me, or I'll definitely refuse this contract." A pang of pain, for reasons unknown, shot through Victor Walker. "Yes." Naomi Bennett nodded repeatedly. A proud man wouldn't be easily swayed by a trick or two. She had used the wrong approach. She obediently sat in the back seat, no longer acting recklessly. Victor Walker's thoughts were a mess. He regained his composure and then started the car. He drove her to her apartment complex. After she got out, he sped off in the rain like a madman. A sinister smile played on Naomi Bennett's lips as she tossed her beautiful long hair, stepped through the puddles, hummed a tune, and turned to enter the residential complex. In 6 years together, Victor Walker had never uttered the word love, nor written it. Their first kiss, their first embrace, happened in the heat of their first time making love. Just like that, after 2 years, Victor Walker said, "Annie, let's get married." Victor Walker had always been the commanding officer, she, the obedient soldier. Just like that, they married. At the time, she had just graduated and been assigned a position at the Institute of Cartography, securing a job before the wedding. The August weather was sweltering, no matter what she wore, she was drenched in sweat. Friends and relatives who came to the wedding reception all stared at her belly, assuming she was pregnant, hence the hasty marriage. Many envied her luck, a father-in-law who was the director of the prosecutor's office, a mother-in-law who was a university professor, and a husband who was a money-maker. Her life seemed charmed. Only she remained clear-headed. Victor Walker was blinded by her goodness, but pity has its limits. One day, he would realize. All she could do for him was to let go unconditionally, sincerely wish him well, and in doing so, completely liberate herself. The more exceptional, the more handsome Victor Walker became, the less she could love him. Material comfort could never breed love. Therefore, for 4 years, she had meticulously practiced birth control, not daring to complicate her life. "Victor Walker, I'm not feeling well. No need for guilt trips. Frankly, I won't make things difficult for you," Annie Reeves thought to herself. "But tonight, I really want to." Victor Walker, fueled by alcohol, his voice soft and languid as silk, gently caressed her smooth skin. Inside him, a volcano seemed to erupt, the molten lava threatening to consume him. "I'll be gentle." He carefully pulled her into his arms, rolled over to cover her face, his hardness rubbing against her softness, his lips raining kisses on her cheek. Annie Reeves was momentarily stunned, her mind reeling. Suddenly, she remembered him with Naomi Bennett, and the instant noodles she had eaten for dinner. Nausea surged from her stomach. She pushed Victor Walker away, jumped out of bed, and dashed to the toilet, where she vomited violently. Victor Walker followed, arms crossed, watching her from the doorway with a knowing look. The bathroom reeked of Kang Master instant noodles. After emptying her stomach, she wiped her mouth and forced a smile. "Oh, I just ate too many noodles. You go to bed first. I'll heat up some water." Victor Walker turned and left without a word. She looked in the mirror at her pale reflection and sighed softly. Ding! A sudden message notification from the corner of the bathroom startled her. She looked down. It was Victor Walker's phone, left in the laundry basket when he showered and changed. Ding! Another chime echoed. She had never touched Victor Walker's phone, absolutely respecting all his privacy. Yet, some inexplicable impulse led her to reach out, retrieve the cell phone from the clothes basket. Who would be messaging this late? Was it spam? Curiosity winning, she opened it, pressed the button. "Are you asleep?" "It's nothing important, I don't want to bother you, but I just wanted to let you know, right now, I'm missing you. My happiest moments are spent with you, my most painful, are right now, missing you, while you're thinking of someone else. Annie Reeves recoiled as if burned, her hand trembling, the phone slipping back into the basket. She anxiously turned towards the bedroom, finding it quiet, and only then did she exhale softly. The sender's number ended in 1314, internet slang for, one life, one lifetime, a romantic number, not Naomi Bennett's 520, I love you. Who was this? Judging by the tone, a secret admirer of Victor Walker, trying to poach him. This number, combined with Naomi Bennett's, formed, I love you for one life, one lifetime, incredibly romantic. Annie Reeves closed her eyes. Victor Walker was indeed a valuable catch. This kind of thing didn't require her intervention, she'd leave it to Naomi Bennett to handle from now on. She shook her head, switched off the light, and entered the bedroom. Victor Walker lay facing outwards, covered by the blanket. She slipped under her own covers, facing inwards, each drifting into their own sleep. Annie Reeves returned to the office. It was Friday, and no one was focused on work, everyone chatting idly, waiting for the day's end. The aching in her body grew increasingly uncomfortable. Restless for over an hour, she packed her things, and left early. The place was called Serenity Spa, located across the street from the park. Upon entering, Annie Reeves was genuinely taken aback. The bright rooms, tastefully decorated, and the soothing aroma calmed her mind. An attendant with a smile as warm as a spring breeze gently inquired about Annie Reeves' needs, then led her inside. The inner area, bathed in the same light as the lobby, felt otherworldly. The dim lighting, yet not oppressive, and the soft carpet absorbing all sound. Exquisite paintings and antique wall lamps created the illusion of a time tunnel, transporting her to a bygone era. The massage room was warmly heated, with just the right amount of fragrance and light. The attendant helped Annie Reeves undress down to her underwear, then lie on the bed. Another woman, wearing sunglasses, was led in. She approached and politely greeted Annie Reeves. Once Annie Reeves confirmed she had no further requests, the others left, leaving only the masseuse and Annie Reeves in the room. Do you usually hunch over your desk? Your body is very stiff. With just a few touches, the masseuse diagnosed Annie Reeves' poor posture habits, her movements varying in pressure depending on the area. Annie Reeves, ticklish and unused to a stranger's touch, tensed her entire body. The masseuse had encountered many people with similar anxieties and occasionally offered a few words to help her gradually relax. In just a moment, she realized that the massage was indeed very relaxing, but there were also times when it was a little painful, but bearable. Sis, if you can't stand it, you can yell, don't hold back, the masseuse said with a smile. Annie Reeves bit her lip, her face flushing. At this moment, from the room next door, fluctuating moans suddenly transmitted, also from a female customer. It seemed the masseuse was doing a great job, making her completely relax and oblivious to her surroundings, hence the cries. The sound was truly like moaning, and although the massage rooms were separate, they were only divided by 2 layers of wooden boards, so the sounds were clearly audible in other rooms. Seemingly startled by the woman's cries, a man in another room also let out a "ah" sound from his throat, although not loud, the sound was like he was exerting himself along with the woman next door. The masseuse chuckled. Annie Reeves's room happened to be sandwiched between the two, making it feel like she was witnessing everything, which was very uncomfortable. Waiting with difficulty for the massage session to end, without resting, Annie Reeves quickly dressed and dashed out the door. In the hallway, a man in a gray shirt stood there, a gentle smile on his face, tall and slender, with the composed demeanor of a man in his 40s. Miss. He saw Annie Reeves and was stunned. It wasn't me. Annie Reeves, assuming he thought she was the moaning woman, quickly denied it, adding, actually, it's not very quiet here, this is a public place, mind your image a bit. The man smiled. And before he could reply, the door of the next room opened, and a large, fat man patted his belly as he walked out. Seeing Annie Reeves, his eyes lit up like a hungry wolf's. "Fuckin' A, today was truly relaxing, still feelin' it, almost made me blow my load," the large, fat man said loudly, staring at Annie Reeves. Hearing this, Annie Reeves's face instantly flushed crimson. Embarrassed, she averted her gaze, not daring to look at the man from before. Her heart pounded, and she stood there frozen, momentarily unsure of what to do. "What are you talking about, sir?" "We just arrived," the man in the gray shirt asked with a smile, stepping in front of Annie Reeves, giving the impression that they had arrived together. The large, fat man suddenly became awkward, glancing at another massage room with a closed door. I was dreaming." His eyes shifted to Annie Reeves, and he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Why wasn't it her? Then, sighing regretfully, he walked outwards, looking back as he went. Annie Reeves didn't dare to leave immediately, afraid that the large, fat man would make further inappropriate associations, so she had to stand with the man in gray for a while. Once the large, fat man was out of sight, she quickly glanced at the man in front of her and basically ran for her life. "Miss, your card." The attendant chased after her from the massage room. Annie Reeves was long gone. "Take me." The man smiled gently. "We know each other." "Sorry to bother you, Dr. Thomas Carter." The waitress respectfully offered the card with both hands. The man took it, looked at the name, and frowned. Why was it Bella West? Wasn't her name Annie Reeves? Even a romantic and thoughtful boyfriend couldn't buy her a smile. "Has the water construction company sent the documents yet?" Victor Walker asked, descending the stairs, his eyes bloodshot. "I don't think so," an employee near the door stood up and replied. Victor Walker frowned, checked his phone, then turned and went back upstairs. CEO Walker. The main entrance doors opened, and the vice president of the water construction company walked in with a smile, holding a folder. Victor Walker hurried down to greet him. Why did the vice president come personally? He glanced outside. Naomi Bennett wasn't with him. Manager Bennett was supposed to bring them, but she said she wanted to go to the Riverside clearance site. I wasn't comfortable entrusting it to anyone else, so I had to come myself. They walked to the adjacent lounge as they spoke. Yvonne West strained her ears to listen. A Riverside survey? Victor Walker was startled. Yes, the location has been chosen, and we have people over there investigating. Lately, almost all the major bridge construction companies have been visiting the site. These are the relevant documents and blueprints. We're interested in Project 2 and Project 3. Victor Walker unfolded the blueprints, smiled, and said, quite a bit of interest, huh? Almost everyone's eyeing Project 2 and 3. If we're going to do it, we might as well do the best project. We'll need CEO Walker's help, of course. Don't mention help. This is a mutually beneficial partnership, Mr. Vice President. Since you're going, let's head over to the Riverside together. I've never worked on a large-scale bridge project like this before. All right. Victor Walker went upstairs to grab his jacket and car keys, gave a few instructions to the head of the evaluation department, and then left with the vice president. Yvonne West's face suddenly swelled with anger, her hands clenching. What site visit? He'd just rushed off for a date with Naomi Bennett after hearing she was there. No, this couldn't happen. How could she let that vile woman gain the upper hand? She took a deep breath, feeling like she was standing before an oncoming train, anxious and uneasy. Her thoughts swirled. She glanced at her colleagues, they were all busy with their work, oblivious to her distress. She grabbed her phone, pretending to go to the restroom. Once inside, she struggled to find Annie Reeves' number and dialed it. The phone rang and rang. Finally, someone answered, the sound of wind whistling in the background. Try, it's Yvonne West. Do you remember me? She spoke in a sweet, enthusiastic voice. Oh, yes, I remember. Annie Reeves' voice was faint against the wind. What's up? What are you doing right now? I'm calling you about something urgent. Annie Reeves paused, asking, I'm not downtown, I'm by the river. Oh my God, what a coincidence. Yvonne West was so thrilled she nearly jumped. Sister Try, I wanted to tell you, CEO Walker is with Naomi Bennett, at the location where the Zhangdai overpass construction is about to begin. Just quietly go over there and see if what I told you is true or not. True or false, what's the difference? Annie Reeves smiled. This really was a case of, the emperor not in a hurry, but the eunuch is. Yvonne West's forehead was dripping with sweat. Sister Try, someone is about to steal what belongs to you, how can you still sit still? Don't you care about CEO Walker, handing him over to the enemy? I don't have such large hands. Yvonne West, you. Why are you telling me these things? I can't stand the kind of woman who breaks up other people's families. Yvonne West lowered her voice, her face flushing slightly. You're so kind, thank you. Annie Reeves gently hung up the phone. Yvonne West heard the subsequent beep, beep, beep. In her ear, was this Mrs. Twen a bit foolish, was she going or not, in the end? Annie Reeves looked up, letting the strong wind on the Truongjiang River blow, cutting into her skin. In just a moment, her eyes filled with tears. Whether these tears were of sorrow, parting, or helplessness, she didn't know anymore, nor did she reach up to wipe them away, just letting them flow down her face. Divorce is always a heavy matter. Since she was young, whenever she encountered something, she would go to the riverbank to sit. Looking at the river, looking at the sun, the Truongjiang wind blowing, then anything could pass. Just then, Yvonne West called. She followed the path along the riverbank, walking aimlessly forward. Covered by firewood and weeds, no one would think she was there. Striding past the large bridge spanning the river, still in the planning stages, but the construction site was already surrounded by wooden barriers, weeds and low-lying trees pulled out, the direction of the bridge span basically visible. Several canoes were docking on the riverbank, a large number of cars parked along the road, a group of people pointing and gesturing towards the river, who knows what they were talking about. Two people separated from the crowd, walking towards Annie Reeves. She stopped, her lips pressed tightly together. Victor Walker and Naomi Bennett were strolling side by side in the breeze, a handsome man and a beautiful woman, like a pair of jade stones. Naomi Bennett was crying so hard her shoulders trembled. Victor Walker patted her shoulder, looking up with an incredibly complex expression. From another angle, it looked exactly like he was holding her. Next, Victor Walker leaned down, saying something to Naomi Bennett. Naomi Bennett shook her head decisively, waving her hands agitatedly, as if crying until exhausted, her head falling back onto Victor Walker's shoulder. Since when had they become so intimate? She clearly had two eyes. Why did she see this scene so late? Annie Reeves' mind was a chaotic mess of thoughts. She numbly took out her phone, without thinking, dialing Naomi Bennett's number. First, Naomi Bennett didn't answer the phone, glanced at it, stood up straight, and pressed decline. Annie Reeves called again. Naomi Bennett waited for 2 rings, nervously glanced at Victor Walker, and then answered her cell phone. I'm in a meeting, I'll call you back later. Naomi Bennett replied curtly and hung up with a tut. Victor Walker raised an eyebrow, slightly surprised. Oh, a friend, we're going shopping. Naomi Bennett explained casually. Victor Walker nodded, and the two turned, shoulder to shoulder, walking towards the car parked by the roadside. As they passed a clump of grass, Naomi Bennett suddenly turned and hugged Victor Walker tightly. Victor Walker stiffened, didn't react, then Naomi Bennett let go. Annie Reeves calmly turned around. Rumors and witnessing something firsthand were two different things. Her heart was still pounding. She also called Victor Walker's cell phone. Are you in a meeting? She asked. No. Victor Walker replied very briefly. Then are you busy? Her pretty lips curved slightly. Is something the matter? Victor Walker's voice was somewhat heavy, or perhaps impatient. Victor Walker, since my father passed away, there's nothing I can't handle. You don't need to worry about anything. Annie Reeves faced the river, her smile like a flower. What are you talking about? Victor Walker roared softly in anger, turning his back. Naomi Bennett, standing to the side, blinked her long eyelashes a few times, suppressing the triumphant glee in her eyes. I just wanted to tell you, I'm ready. She slowly closed her phone and walked straight ahead without turning back. Victor Walker's phone rang repeatedly, but Annie Reeves directly declined the calls and walked quickly forward. It was getting dark. Hopefully, she could still catch a ride back to the city. Victor Walker glanced at her while talking with the general managers. She spoke very little, standing to the side, quietly not interrupting. After the conversation, she deliberately lingered behind. Victor Walker slowed his pace, waited for her, and asked if she was okay. She kept apologizing for last night's foolishness, saying she was crazy, that maybe the divorce from William Carter had triggered it, that she could be so shameless. Victor Walker repeated his earlier statement, that they were both drunk. And he didn't mind. Shame spread across her face, and as she kept talking, she started to cry. Victor Walker was forced to lead her elsewhere. She said she heard news today that William Carter would soon be promoted to Deputy Director Michael Scott of the city and would soon be getting married, apparently to the daughter of a government official. Without her, he was really climbing the ladder. It wasn't entirely fake. A pang of bitterness struck her heart, truly touching a sore spot, and she cried hopelessly. Victor Walker comforted her, incredibly attentive and caring. She continued to cry. Her phone rang. She saw it was Annie Reeves and guiltily pressed the decline button. It rang again, and she reluctantly answered. As she looked up, she suddenly saw Annie Reeves standing in the reeds. At that moment, she was panicked, but she quickly regained her composure. Annie Reeves just stood watching, making no move to approach. This is truly a once-in-a-blue-moon opportunity. She and Victor Walker returned. She suddenly hugged Victor Walker, saying, "Thank you for listening to me. I feel much better now. I won't do anything stupid again." By the time Victor Walker thought about pushing her away, she was already gone. Annie Reeves witnessed this entire scene. Annie Reeves called Victor Walker, wanting to scream with joy. But she didn't, instead sighing as she walked, feigning helplessness and weakness. From now on, she wouldn't actively approach Victor Walker, she would make him come to her, step by step. On the way back to the city, Victor Walker was clearly disturbed, nearly colliding with oncoming cars several times. Naomi Bennett, frightened, repeatedly asked to get out and demanded to drive for a while. Victor Walker shook his head, biting his lip, his grip on the steering wheel unwavering. He started the car again, driving somewhat better. He didn't offer to take Naomi Bennett to dinner, and she didn't ask. After dropping her off at her complex gate, he left. As soon as Naomi Bennett got out of the car, she received a call from Yvonne West. Yvonne West, after all, was still young and impatient. "Manager Walker, are you satisfied today?" Yvonne West asked. Not bad." The corner of Naomi Bennett's mouth twitched. Having been that age herself, she understood these youthful thoughts. "Everything went smoothly, work was good, and my mood is even better." "Of course it's good." CEO Walker came specifically for Manager Walker. Yvonne West sneered. However, CEO Walker wasn't alone, was he? "Is that so? I didn't really notice. But what does any of this have to do with you?" Yvonne West was momentarily speechless, then huffed, "Let me tell you, don't get too cocky. They're a loving couple, so don't be shameless." Naomi Bennett walked to a tall pine tree and couldn't help but laugh. "Yes, I'm shameless. As long as you're ashamed, that's fine. Don't shine your flashlight on others while you're hiding in the shadows watching the show. Little girl, don't rely on your youth. Compared to me, in front of men, you're still very green. Keeping an eye on your boyfriend at the tax bureau is what you should be focusing on. Unable to bear it any longer, she hung up, leaving Yvonne West fuming on the other end. Naomi Bennett scoffed. Kids like Yvonne West just wanted to get closer to Victor Walker, to get a little more attention. That was all it was, and she wasn't worried in the slightest. Even Yvonne West called Victor Walker and his wife a loving couple. She found it laughable. Knowing Annie Reeves for so many years, she couldn't understand her. Indifferent to everything, with an attitude of, if it happens, if not, whatever. The truth was, Annie Reeves was lucky. She won Victor Walker over without doing anything. Did Annie Reeves love Victor Walker? At least, it didn't show. Victor Walker had gone on business trips with her several times, and she rarely saw Annie Reeves actively call him. It was always Victor Walker who called her from the site to let her know where he was. If Victor Walker didn't bring up the divorce with Annie Reeves, would Annie Reeves ever mention it? Her eyes darted around as she took out her mobile phone. Annie, so sorry, I hung up on you earlier. I was in a rush. Where are you? Let's grab that seafood pizza you love. Annie Reeves's voice was flat. Tomorrow. I have a terrible cold and need to sleep. Should I bring you some? This was a polite gesture. For now, she needed to appear caring, to avoid Victor Walker's displeasure. Thanks, but I don't have much of an appetite. Well, get some good rest, drink plenty of fluids, and I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, see you tomorrow. Naomi Bennett shivered as she closed her phone. Annie Reeves had clearly seen her with Victor Walker, so how could she act like nothing happened? Logically, she shouldn't have answered the phone, or she should have yelled at her. She shouldn't be so calm. Was Annie Reeves a Buddhist nun in a past life? A serene and detached soul brought into this one? Or was this just an act? Naomi Bennett couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. Annie Reeves briskly tossed the onions into the pan. Victor Walker stiffened. What's so great about it? It's actually quite boring. He knew Annie Reeves had been acting strangely for the past 2 days, including this phone call, but he didn't want to press her. He wanted her to tell him what was going on. This stupid example, wasn't it hinting at something? He couldn't help but feel angry. He didn't like Annie Reeves's strangeness, it made him feel lost and confused. In peacetime, how many earth-shattering events can there be? Most of our time is spent in boredom. Annie Reeves chuckled softly. Do you want to change? Yes. The rising steam obscured her face, making it difficult for him to see her expression. What kind of change? A new job? A new house? Or a vacation? The aroma of the signature dish, along with the pungent fragrance of onions, began to fill the kitchen. This scent made Victor Walker tremble slightly, stirring a feeling of longing within him. What about you? Don't you want to change? Annie Reeves turned around, smiled, and picked up the curry sauce, dividing it between their plates. Damn it, her stomach started churning again. She swallowed hard, her face paling. Victor Walker, busy with his bowl and chopsticks, didn't notice. I like everything as it is. I don't want any changes right now. He answered very seriously. Annie Reeves frowned. Seriously? What about Naomi Bennett, hiding in the shadows as a secret lover? Was her position as his wife unshakable? Or was Victor Walker worried that she wouldn't be able to handle it and would suddenly commit suicide like her father? She appreciated Victor Walker's generosity and care, but she couldn't accept this. Knowing Naomi Bennett, she probably wouldn't either. One person leaving would be better than 3 people entangled in this mess. After dinner, I have something to tell you. She opened the lid, and the aroma of chicken curry rice filled the kitchen. Neither of them spoke further. She turned around. Victor Walker was in the dining room, on the phone, his expression furious, his voice harsh. Concrete division, didn't I tell you last night? Why haven't you finished the calculations yet? The client had something come up, so they delayed by a day, otherwise, the contract should be in their hands today. I don't want to hear your excuses, be at work early tomorrow morning, I want the completed contract on my desk. Click. Victor Walker snapped his phone shut, his face tight with anger, biting his lip, fuming. No, I can't lose face, I have to go to the office and check. He muttered to himself, grabbed his coat, and hurried out. At the doorway, he turned back. Annie Reeves was setting the table, holding a bowl and arranging the chopsticks. Is Yvonne West at the office now? Annie, you eat first, I'll be back late, don't wait up for me. Okay. Annie Reeves sat down, smiling at him. Looking at the fragrant curry rice on the table, Victor Walker hesitated for a moment, but the contract was more important. He resolutely pulled the door open and left. Annie Reeves heard the door slam shut. She started to eat, lifting the food to her mouth with her chopsticks, her mouth opening wide, but tasting nothing. The thought of divorce grew within her, like a bird spreading its wings, struggling in her chest, about to burst free. How should she bring it up? What reason should she use, or should she even give one? Annie Reeves felt confused. Was it because of William Carter's words, the lipstick on Victor Walker, or the embrace with Naomi Bennett by the river? Were these reasons enough? What about the 4 years of pity? No, she couldn't say that. She wanted to keep some good memories for later. But no matter what, she had to make a change. She couldn't bear this life any longer. She wanted change, she wanted a divorce. She put down her bowl and picked up her phone. Woman expert, tell me, how can I get a divorce as quickly as possible? Catch him in the act. Bella West's voice came through, romantic music playing in the background. That would give you the quickest freedom, and if it's public, you'll have public support. Besides that, is there any other way? Irreconcilable differences or an unsatisfactory sex life are important factors, but if he doesn't agree, they can be overlooked. Okay, I'll call you tomorrow. Bella West lowered her voice. I'm on a date. A date? Annie Reeves clutched her chest, feeling nauseous. A real man has finally appeared, Annie. I have a feeling, like my soulmate has arrived. Oh, he knows you. Bella West's voice was filled with the giddy excitement of a woman in love. Annie Reeves blinked a few times. Who did she know? Unable to hold back any longer, she covered her mouth, threw down her phone, and ran to the bathroom. It was him, a tiny voice repeated over and over in her heart. This specialist was the very image of mature masculinity she couldn't resist. She had imagined, upon meeting him, she wouldn't be able to refuse. Dr. Thomas Carter, looking about 40, appeared younger than his actual age at first glance. He took off his coat, revealing a charcoal gray sweater underneath. From the style and material, one could see it was a meticulously tailored, expensive piece of clothing that flattered his figure. His physique was tall and solid, well-maintained, with lines and posture suggesting rigorous physical training. He introduced himself as Lance Carter, then smiled slightly, a warm, modest, and exemplary smile, without the antiseptic smell often associated with doctors. Bella West's ears burned, her heart pounded, tongue-tied, completely losing her usual vivacious demeanor. As Chief Editor Johnson was introducing her, Lance Carter looked up and asked, "Do you know Annie Reeves, Ms. West?" "Oh, yes, she's my best friend." "Dr. Thomas Carter, do you know Annie too?" Bella West was extremely surprised. Lance Carter didn't answer directly. Her husband is Victor Walker. Aha. Bella West guessed Lance Carter might be a friend of Victor Walker. How are they doing? The waiter brought the coffee. Lance Carter took it, passed it to the two women, and then took his own. Bella West swallowed, unsure of his intent, cautiously replying, they're doing great. Lance Carter chuckled, sipped his coffee, and turned to softly inquire about Chief Editor Johnson's husband's condition after his discharge from the hospital. Bella West quietly assessed Lance Carter, her heart sinking a little deeper with each glance. Love was strange, springing forth unannounced. This was just a stranger she'd just met, yet she felt as if she had been waiting for him for a long time. She clutched her chest, a misty dampness welling up in her eyes. No woman wanted to be single forever, she just hadn't met the right man. So-called lovers were just an exchange of bodies, a desolate and lonely affection, nothing more, no long-term commitment. She sought someone older than herself, in age and maturity, and of course, financially secure, someone who would pamper her, indulge her, treat her like both a lover and a daughter. Dr. Thomas Carter is in Xinjiang, how is your family? Chief Editor Johnson inquired solicitously, refilling Lance Carter's coffee. Lance Carter thanked her, my parents are in good health, my younger brother is with them. Then, if I may ask, did your wife and children come to Xinjiang with you? Chief Editor Johnson asked politely, like a concerned hostess. Lance Carter looked up, the light in his eyes dimming. My daughter is 10 years old, she's in England with her mother. Chief Editor Johnson immediately stopped, unable to continue the line of questioning. With them on opposite sides of the globe, they were either divorced or about to be, otherwise, how could they bear to leave such a young child behind? Being a doctor ain't like other gigs, it's a job with no borders. Bella West, eavesdropping nearby, couldn't help but jump for joy. The timing, the location, the people, all the elements were in her favor. The phone rang. Annie. She nodded to Lance Carter, turning her back to listen. Lance Carter chatted with Chief Editor Johnson, his gaze, whether intentionally or not, kept drifting towards Bella West. She answered intermittently, and he caught bits and pieces, a faint amusement playing on his lips. Bella West turned around. It's Annie, she told Lance Carter. You two seem close. Is she still working out in the field? Lance Carter raised an eyebrow, beckoning to a waiter. She's happily playing housewife, always been a stay-at-home type, Bella West said. No, allow me. Chief Editor Johnson, seeing the waiter hand the bill to Lance Carter, quickly intervened. There's no reason for a lady to pay. Lance Carter chuckled, pulling out his wallet to settle the bill, then turned his attention back to Bella West. I have to visit my aunt across the river tomorrow morning, so I'll be heading off. I'll treat you and Annie to dinner sometime. That would be lovely. Bella West busily grabbed her business card, offering it to Lance Carter with both hands. You can call me anytime. Lance Carter nodded. Chief Editor Johnson profusely thanked Lance Carter as she saw him to the door. Wow, Bella West, seeing Lance Carter's dazzling SUV, couldn't help but admire it inwardly. It was the exclusive Green Tiger, the most expensive and beautifully designed of the 4 Green Tiger series, the most luxurious SUV on the domestic market, a time-honored brand originating from England, known as the steed of noble lineage. Its appearance wasn't clunky, its engine noise wasn't ostentatious, elegant, understated, and powerful. Only true nobility could drive such a car, unlike those nouveau riche who think driving a speeding BMW makes them classy. Like owner, like car. Bella West was head over heels for Lance Carter. She swore she would snag this man. Lance Carter politely bid farewell, his Green Tiger piercing through the vibrant sunset and into the deepening twilight. Stop staring. As they say in Chinese, lustful thoughts arise. Chief Editor Johnson glanced at Bella West, teasingly. Bella West burst out laughing, not the least bit embarrassed. Chief Editor Johnson hurried home to her husband. After they parted ways, Bella West immediately called Annie Reeves, hoping to glean more information about Lance Carter. Annie, you little devil, you dare hang up on me? Bella West, hearing the sweet, automated voice message, snapped her phone shut, a smirk playing on her lips. Yeah, you're up front, living for yourself. These days, so many people settle for loveless marriages for money and status. You're doing it for love, what can I say? Annie Reeves continued, I had a crush once. The longer the sweetness, the longer the bitterness. Seeing him and his girlfriend all lovey-dovey, I felt both heartache for myself and happiness for him. Love isn't wrong, but to love at the expense of another's pain, even if I won, how long could it last? I chose to give them my blessing, turning love into friendship. I didn't lose him, I gained so much more. You, have a crush on someone? Naomi Bennett's heart pounded, leaping to her throat. William Carter, Annie Reeves replied. Naomi Bennett gasped, I had no idea. You had no idea, and neither did William Carter. It was just a crush. 19 years old, clueless about everything, falling head over heels for the first guy who showed me kindness. I couldn't explain why I liked him, and before I could confess, you were already by his side. Annie Reeves reminisced about her school days, a hint of nostalgia in her expression. Even without Annie Reeves lifting a finger, Naomi Bennett felt a resounding slap across her face, burning with shame. Later, at a gathering, you and William Carter were both drunk. He grabbed my hand and told me that the letter was actually meant for me, but he'd mistakenly given it to you. I didn't press the matter, pretending I'd heard nothing, because I saw you and William Carter were happy together. Enough, Naomi Bennett abruptly interrupted Annie Reeves. There was no need to say more, the metaphorical slaps raining down were already humiliating enough. If Annie Reeves had intervened then, she and William Carter could never have married. Was Annie Reeves here to preach and make her examine her conscience? Wrong. Back then, Annie Reeves was just a country bumpkin fresh off the bus, clueless about everything. But she, Naomi, was different. She would never do anything so foolish. How could William Carter back then compare to Victor Walker now? William Carter is single now, not yet married. You still have time, she said sarcastically. Annie Reeves smiled faintly. Whether he's free or not has nothing to do with me. I remember Joanna Adams once saying we always complain that fate arrives either too early or too late. But that's wrong. Even if you could go back to that moment and meet that person, you might not necessarily like them. What's missed is lost, there's no need to repeat it. So, will you leave Victor Walker? As soon as the words left her mouth, Naomi Bennett regretted them, wishing she could slap herself. It sounded like she was begging for scraps. Annie Reeves stood up. That's between Victor Walker and me. It's none of your business. Naomi Bennett flushed crimson, choking on her words. She struggled to regain composure, glaring at Annie Reeves. Actually, you don't love Victor Walker. You just crave everything he provides, don't you? Annie Reeves finished putting on her coat. Why did we get married? She met Naomi Bennett's ashamed gaze. Huh? Naomi Bennett was momentarily speechless. Is it to grow old together, raise children? Or is it a game of ambiguity, infidelity, and divorce? If you can't be happy together forever, why get married? Isn't it easier to be free? Hey, sis, the bill. The young woman from the bakery came over with the bill. Together? The girl glanced at Naomi Bennett's juice glass. You're mistaken. I don't know her. Annie Reeves paid the girl, picked up her bag, and walked out without looking back. Naomi Bennett sat dumbfounded. Annie Reeves said she didn't know her. Had she misheard? If Victor Walker was the prize and she and Annie Reeves were rivals, then in this first round, she'd lost. She hadn't expected the gentle, frail Annie Reeves to be so sharp. She'd underestimated her. At some point, it had started to rain. The fine, dust-like droplets on Annie Reeves's face instantly transformed into tears. She reached the subway entrance just as a train pulled in. She quickly boarded, stood by the door as it closed, and saw her pale, haggard reflection in the glass. She stared at herself. She'd never really looked at herself this way before. Was the expression on her face now one of hurt and agitation? Or the cold, decisive finality of a severed connection? The train stopped, then continued to the next station. Annie Reeves, sure she was the second to leave, found a quiet corner, sat down, and texted Victor Walker, "Victor Walker, let's get a divorce." Yvonne West covered her mouth, looking at him in disbelief, then, sobbing, pushed open the door and ran downstairs. Victor Walker heard Yvonne West's footsteps fade on the stairs. Dejected, he sat back down, looked at the mess on the floor, rubbed his temples, and closed his eyes. The light in Victor Walker's office burned all night. Finally, at 5 a.m., a completed contract lay on his desk. "Prepare the car. I'm going to Shanghai myself." Bloodshot eyes showed Victor Walker's fatigue. He couldn't take this lightly. The appointment was already half a day late. He had to apologize to the client in person. Even if they were just middle class, honor and reputation were everything. The morning sun streamed through the glass windows, illuminating everyone's faces with a peaceful, quiet light. Yvonne West hadn't written a resignation letter. Her eyes, swollen from crying, were fixed submissively on the computer screen. For hours, she'd sat there, seemingly resigned to her fate, diligently calculating all the data for the best concrete mix. Victor Walker glanced at her. "Yvonne West, you're in charge of the contract. Come with me to Shanghai. Everyone else has the day off." He habitually reached for his phone to call Annie Reeves. His pocket was empty. He froze, remembering. He'd forgotten. He'd tell her when he got back. The trip from Xianjiang to Shanghai was only a couple hundred kilometers. He could get there and back in a day. Yvonne West looked up in surprise. Victor Walker's gaze was calm, betraying nothing. Her lips trembled. "Yes, CEO Walker." A tear rolled down her cheek and landed on her trembling hand. Dawn had just broken, and there were few cars on the road. Victor Walker's group quickly left the city and reached the highway. Worried about driving while exhausted, he let the office chauffeur drive the company car. It was comfortable, with room to stretch or even lie down, perfect for long journeys. He and Yvonne West sat in the back. Yvonne West rested her chin on her hand, staring blankly at the scenery rushing past the window, her face drawn and pale. Tuiqian Company intends to bid on 2 sections of the Changjiang Bridge project, and they've assigned it to our department. This is a high-stakes undertaking, and it's confirmed we're in charge. After you return from Shanghai, reorganize your current workload and come assist me. Victor Walker elegantly crossed his legs, his tone businesslike. Yvonne West slowly turned her head, utterly astonished. "Why?" Victor Walker's words felt like a stinging reprimand, leaving her dazed and humiliated, a sharp pain piercing her heart. He wasn't engaging in a romantic game with her, he was a leader tolerating her foolishness and unwarranted provocation. He used the word harassment, and the intensity in Victor Walker's eyes made Yvonne West forget all her calculations. "I've said I value your work ethic. It's not just you. Anyone in this office who puts in the effort will receive the same opportunities." Having finished speaking, Victor Walker relaxed his posture, closed his eyes, and fell silent. "Oh." Yvonne West gave a self-deprecating laugh, her pride lost somewhere in the Pacific, with no desire to retrieve it. He only cared about her competence, maintaining a strictly professional demeanor. She wondered how smug Naomi Bennett would be if she knew the whole story. She glanced at Victor Walker's handsome face. Such a man, so close, yet not hers. He disregarded her captivating beauty, choosing instead a divorced Naomi Bennett. Life had a cruel sense of irony. Yvonne West seethed with resentment, directing all her anger towards Naomi Bennett. The driver suddenly clicked his tongue, prompting Victor Walker to open his eyes. "What's wrong?" "Mr. Walker, it's almost 10 a.m., and the sun's still half obscured. I'm afraid there might be fog on our return trip. The highway might be closed. If it is, we'll be stuck overnight." Victor Walker sat up and lowered the window. The sunlight was weak and pale, the air thick with humidity, visibility limited. "Let's have lunch and head back. We'll take turns driving and try to reach Xianjiang by midday." The driver nodded. Victor Walker patted his pockets, finding them empty. Damn, not having his phone was inconvenient. "Let me borrow your phone." He extended his hand towards the driver. The driver handed it over. Victor Walker, taking the phone, was taken aback. He'd always saved Annie Reeves' number, placing it at the top of his contact list. He could call her by simply pressing 1, yet he'd never memorized the actual digits. "What is it?" he muttered, frowning in thought. After a long pause, he gave up with a shake of his head and dialed his home number instead. No one answered at home. Yvonne West had Annie Reeves' number in her phone. She looked at Victor Walker, wanting to speak but hesitating. It was best to minimize her interactions with him now. Victor Walker hadn't asked her for Annie Reeves' number, so how could she offer it? Victor Walker snapped the phone shut, his face flushed and grim, as if he'd stepped in something unpleasant. Before returning to Tanjong, Annie Reeves visited the cemetery. In the flower shop, she bought a bouquet of chrysanthemums. Under the gloomy sky, their white color appeared incredibly stark, sorrowful, and mournful. On the tombstone, her father's face remained as peaceful as ever. She placed the flowers before the grave and slowly sat down. The wind, coming from all directions, ruffled her hair, but she didn't bother to smooth it down. "Dad, I'm sorry, I've disappointed you. The last time I disappointed you was when I didn't get into the academy you hoped for after high school. Even though you didn't say anything, I knew you weren't happy. This is the second time. I've decided to divorce Victor Walker. If you were still alive, would you agree?" You never met Victor Walker. He's very handsome on the outside, and also very accomplished, the kind of man heaven truly favors, with countless good qualities. You know, I used to say I was very lucky to be married to him. Annie Reeves looked up and chuckled softly, as if mocking herself. Fate arranged for me and this exceptional man to become husband and wife. I was a little scared, or rather, not confident enough. I always thought we weren't the same kind of people. I like things simple and quiet, he likes them elaborate, meticulous, and bustling. I don't know what he saw in me. Dad, if I was going to be his wife, I wanted to be happy, to truly love him. But I don't know if he really loved me. You'd laugh and say I'm being silly, but it's true. In the end, I felt like it was all a dream, one I held gently in my hands, anxiously guarding it, afraid it would disappear. It took me 4 years to figure out his feelings for me, and the result? I just watched the dream shatter, piece by piece. Dad, I don't hate him, and I don't blame myself for not doing well. This was just our short-lived fate. I'm 27, no children, no outstanding career, wanting a divorce right away, and having lost the father I love. It's pretty miserable, isn't it? But Dad, my life is already at rock bottom, the worst possible state. Every day after this can't be any worse, it can only get better. What do I have to worry about? I'm not old yet. I can still meet someone I love, my career will improve. Dad, I have a tomorrow, so just sigh a few disappointed breaths, don't worry too much. Mom's doing well with stocks, so don't worry about her. I'll take care of her. Take care of yourself, Dad. Annie Reeves wiped away her tears, stood up, and bowed deeply towards the tombstone. From the cemetery back to the bus station, Annie Reeves, though still breathing heavily, felt much better. She just managed to catch the last bus back to Tanjong. The bus was packed, and it looked rather dilapidated, the windows rattling as it drove. It was still afternoon, but the driver had already turned on the headlights. Fog blanketed the earth and sky. Annie Reeves sat by the window. Even someone standing close to the driver wouldn't be able to see his face clearly. After a bumpy ride to the ferry terminal, it was already dark. The fog was thick, visibility at most 50 meters. Seeing there was still space on the ferry, the driver, pleased, urged the passengers to get off and busily drove the bus onto the ferry. Annie Reeves grimaced, following the crowd off the bus. It was no good, the swaying had made her nauseous. Spotting a public restroom nearby, she endured the discomfort and hurried inside. Just as she finished wiping her mouth, she heard the ferry's horn. She dashed towards it, but the ferry was already slowly pulling away from the shore. The ferry terminal manager's voice boomed over the loudspeaker. Due to heavy fog on the river, and for the safety of passengers and vehicles, ferry crossings are temporarily suspended. Service will resume tomorrow after the fog clears. Annie Reeves stood on the steps, staring wide-eyed at the churning river. Behind her, a long line of drivers waiting to cross cursed in unison. The cursing was likely just a vent. No one would risk their lives in this fog. After their outburst, they went to buy food for the night. Some huddled in their cabs, calling home, while others simply closed their eyes and slept. Annie Reeves's car was probably already halfway across the river. There wasn't a single hotel or guest house near the ferry terminal. Where was she supposed to go? Lance Carter's car was also stuck in the stalled traffic. He inched forward, but ultimately missed the last ferry. He had a surgery scheduled for tomorrow and was incredibly anxious, but there was nothing he could do. He'd just spoken to the hospital, postponing the surgery by 2 hours. Lost in thought, he glanced at Annie Reeves, who stood like a statue. He blinked a few times, then hesitantly spoke, "Annie Reeves." Annie Reeves turned around in surprise. Lance Carter spoke calmly, his expression unchanged. Perhaps the past was so distant that time had erased all traces, leaving this encounter as just a drop in the long river of memories. Annie Reeves listened silently, offering no comment. She found it strange that he would so readily confide in her about such personal matters, considering they were strangers. Love can never escape reality. Social compatibility, shared aspirations, these aren't just empty words. For a lasting marriage, love alone isn't enough. Lightning attracted to earth fire, such a passion is merely a fleeting brilliance, leaving only ashes when it burns out. But how many people truly understand this? Divorce doesn't mean happiness is over. If the bond is truly broken, separation can be a good thing. DM's mother remarried last year. She's living happily with her partner, and her husband loves DM very much. There's nothing wrong with us not living together. You're very magnanimous, Annie Reeves said. So why are you in Tanjong? She wasn't being nosy, nor was she particularly curious about this gentle man. The night was long, and she simply didn't know how to pass the time. I'm here for a 2-year teaching position at Tanjong's #1 People's Hospital. He was a doctor. Only now did Annie Reeves inquire about his profession. So you're at the hospital every day? The hospital provides me with a small apartment in Kevin. Kevin. Annie Reeves smiled faintly. That's the best residential area in Tanjong. You can see the Truongjiang River right from the doorway. The apartments there were designed by my classmate, Linda Reeves, who won a National Gold Design Award. Really? You study architecture too? Lance Carter seemed surprised. No, I studied construction management. Did your friend design anything else famous later on? No, after winning the award, she changed careers. She's an online author now. Changing careers a bit isn't bad, just a little unfortunate. Lance Carter really couldn't figure out what connection there was between a house designer and an online literary author. Who knows? Maybe because you love someone, you'll also love a part of their profession, and give up the part of your profession that doesn't feel right. You won't get tired of the work you love. Changing jobs isn't necessarily a bad thing. I understand her. Having drunk too much water, Annie Reeves felt her stomach bloating a bit. She looked outside. The fog was so thick she couldn't clearly see the small shop across the street. I'm going outside for a bit. She grabbed her purse and pushed open the car door. Wait a minute. Lance Carter called her back, got out of the car with her, and placed a flashlight in her hand. The restroom might not be clean. Use this. I'll hold your bag. Annie Reeves choked up, a long-forgotten feeling welling up inside her. She felt like she was a little girl again, being picked up and dropped off by her dad every day. Like a wooden figure, she went into the restroom, did her business, washed her hands, and came out. Lance Carter was standing outside the restroom, smiling, holding her bag, his whole body enveloped in fog. This scene moved her to tears. In a strange place, late at night, having a man wait for her outside the restroom, this feeling was indescribable. Touching, warm, and very safe. How could he be so formal yet so humble and polite? This was something Annie Reeves had never seen in another man. She wasn't young and beautiful anymore, nor did she exude any alluring scent. Why would a man treat her with such respect and care? Maybe it was thanks to Bella West's blessing. Thank you. She smiled and took her bag. The night temperature had dropped sharply, her hands were freezing, and she blew on them. A dull ache pulsed in her lower abdomen. Get back in the car. Lance Carter opened the car door for her, but didn't get in himself. Annie Reeves lay curled up on the seat, clutching her stomach. A moment later, Lance Carter got back in the car, bringing a bowl of hot noodles with a delicate aroma. Eat some noodles. It takes at least a month for the toxins in the noodles to wear off. These are special times, don't worry about such things. Lance Carter pressed a button, and a small square table suddenly appeared in front of Annie Reeves. Lance Carter placed the noodles on it. Is it only poison for me? Annie Reeves was tempted by the aroma of the noodles and swallowed, but there was only one bowl. You know, doctors always have a bit of a thing about cleanliness. I can't eat this stuff. Your lips are pale with cold. Eat quickly, and give me all the dumplings. Annie Reeves touched her lips, picked up the spoon. Opened the lid of the bowl, the rising steam caressed her face, and her eyes couldn't help but water. It must be the steam, she thought. Annie Reeves bit her lip, holding back the tears welling up in her eyes. Yvonne West, I'm not overthinking it. Aren't you the one reading too much into things? She tilted her head dismissively, giving Yvonne West a strange look. Mrs. Walker, I. Yvonne West's face flushed crimson, her eyes darting away. Your phone number ends in 1314, doesn't it? That number frequently texts Victor Walker late at night. You think I'm clueless? And what about the driver's clothes being covered in vomit? You're so thoughtful, I've never felt so cared for. You meet another man's wife and then make moves on her husband. Such a good woman. Nin Wai wished the earth would swallow her whole. Victor Walker became ill in the car, his face pale with pain. She purposely sent the driver to buy stomach medicine and offered to take Victor Walker upstairs herself. She had intended to network with Annie Reeves, but when she found Annie Reeves wasn't home, she was delighted to help Victor Walker to bed. As soon as he lay down, he uncontrollably vomited all over her face and neck. After vomiting, Victor Walker felt a little better. A man who valued cleanliness as much as he didn't even glance at her, and hurried into the bathroom to rinse his mouth. She found a set of pajamas in the bedroom and changed, conveniently changing the bedsheets as well. The driver hadn't returned with the medicine yet, and Victor Walker was still in the shower. She paced back and forth in the spacious room, starting to feel like the lady of the house. She poured herself a cup of coffee and had just sat down when the door opened. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Walker. I'm young and foolish, I did something stupid. I won't do it again. Minhwa's face burned with shame, her eyes fixed on the floor. Don't tell me any of that. Grab your clothes and get out. Annie Reeves stared sternly at her, pointing to the door. If you're so eager to move in, maybe you can give me some time to move out. Minhwa's face turned from black to purple, then to a stark white. Utterly humiliated, she snatched her clothes from the floor and fled. At that moment, the bathroom door opened, and Victor Walker emerged, wearing a bathrobe. What's wrong? He asked, noticing the tears in Yvonne West's eyes. Nothing. Yvonne West choked out, heading for the door. Just then, the driver returned with the medicine and looked at her in shock. She put the medicine on the table, grabbed the driver's arm, and without another word, rushed out in a fluster. Victor Walker blinked a few times, then walked into the bedroom. Annie Reeves stood by the window, her back to him. Going out without a word, he said, stretching out on the bed. Why did you give her those clothes to wear? Annie Reeves turned around, her delicate face creased with a frown, her eyes filled with undisguised disappointment. What clothes? Victor Walker asked, momentarily confused. Your nightgown. Huh? That outfit? What's the big deal if she wore it? I didn't notice. If you like it, we can just buy a few more. Victor Walker closed his eyes, the post-shower feeling easing his stomach slightly. His stomach troubles stemmed from the relentless bid preparation, skipping meals, and now even a little exertion caused unbearable pain. Victor Walker, can you please spare me from this? I hate feeling like a shrew, constantly suspicious and afraid. I don't want this kind of life. If this somehow boosts your ego, then let me go. Find someone else to take my place. Annie Reeves was furious, tears streaming down her face. Victor Walker frowned slightly, closing his eyes again. What are you talking about? I don't understand. If you're upset about Yvonne West wearing your nightgown, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. You're not usually this petty, Annie. As my wife, can't you be a little more generous towards my employees? She wanted to laugh hysterically. Handing her husband over to someone else on a silver platter, then playing dumb, pretending not to see or hear anything, that's what being generous meant. She didn't have the energy to argue with him anymore. Victor Walker was a delicious cake, if someone else wanted a slice, they could have it. She was tired. Victor Walker, did you get my message? She gave Victor Walker a pained look. 2 years of love, 2 years of marriage, for years, everything was about to become the past. She wasn't in love anymore, just filled with a sense of sadness and failure. If not affection, couldn't he at least show her some respect? My phone broke. Victor Walker turned over, facing the wall. He felt his usually quiet wife was being deliberately difficult today. He was too tired to argue, just wanting a good night's sleep. Annie Reeves shook her head, unsure whether to laugh or cry. Fate played such cruel jokes. She walked over to the bed and said, "Well, I might as well tell you now, Victor Walker." Soft snores came from the bed. Victor Walker was fast asleep. Annie Reeves stared blankly at Victor Walker, feeling increasingly estranged. She sighed, leaving her luggage unpacked and walking out of the house again. She wanted to part ways amicably, to calmly say goodbye. If they couldn't be husband and wife, he could at least remain the respected senior she once knew. Tanjong wasn't big, they were bound to run into each other. There was no need to make things awkward. Now she saw it was just her, offering herself up willingly. Annie Reeves found a place to settle down, the turmoil in her heart easing slightly. Today was Sunday, the registry office was closed. Tomorrow, Monday, she would find time to finalize the divorce with Victor Walker. He wouldn't be bothered anymore, and she wouldn't be heartbroken. From then on, he could walk his Ray Johnson path, and she would cross her single-plank bridge. No longer intertwined, a brighter tomorrow would come. Annie Reeves, afraid of disturbing Linda Reeves's sleep, left the room. Willows lined the streets, their leaves already turning yellow in this season. Few pedestrians were out. Further down the road, a willow swayed gracefully in the breeze, a poignant image of waiting for someone in the twilight. Across the street stood the renowned Key Veen. The rooms within Key Veen, unlike other apartments, possessed a refined elegance. From the outset of construction, the owner declared it a rental-only property, with tenants vetted by the Neum family, making wealth insufficient for securing a lease. This exclusivity fueled curiosity, making a Key Veen tenancy a status symbol in Tanjong. Seeing no one around, as dusk settled, Annie Reeves finally let her tears flow. Victor Walker had a stomach ache, she should stay and care for him, make him some easily digestible porridge. The house was a bit messy, and she wanted to tidy it up properly. She wasn't cold-hearted, much less uncaring, but she couldn't bear to stay in that house a moment longer. Naomi Bennett's words, the pajamas Yvonne West wore, kept flashing through her mind. Without her, Victor Walker would have others vying to care for him, so what was she worried about? If he'd been gone all day, why hadn't Victor Walker even called? For her, he was nothing more than a name on a legal document, his presence or absence made little difference. Their marriage had reached a sorry state. There was no assigning blame, only the acknowledgement that their bond had frayed. The phone in her pocket suddenly rang, startling Annie Reeves. She lacked the courage to answer. The insistent ringing forced her hand. It was Bella West. She figured Bella had found a room, ever the woman of action. Wiping her tears and composing her voice, she answered. "Annie, Lance Carter just called and invited us to dinner," Bella West's voice, high with excitement, announced. "I'm busy, out and about," Annie Reeves flatly refused, only later recalling who Lance Carter was and noting his enthusiasm. "No way, he invited both of us." "Come on, you're on your own anyway. Get out, socialize, and unwind a bit. Maybe another time." "I really don't want to go out tonight." "Absolutely not. I don't usually push when you decline, but not today. I'm worried about you. Go. Tell me where you are." Lance Carter offered to pick us up. Bella West was incredibly persistent, her tone brooking no refusal. She hadn't expected Lance Carter to ask her out so quickly, though it wasn't a date, of course. She was playing hard to get, increasing her perceived value. This required Annie Reeves's presence. Annie Reeves understood Bella West's motives. Lance Carter was just Bella's friend, why should she intrude? He was probably just being polite. Normally, she'd refuse, especially now, feeling emotionally drained and looking like a wreck. "Bella, I'm so sorry." Don't. Bella West immediately cut her off. "Don't refuse his kindness. It won't take long. Just have dinner and leave, you don't have to stay afterward. How about that?" Annie Reeves sighed, unable to argue further, and relented. Why had she ever befriended someone like Bella West? What she needed now was a warm embrace, not a boisterous gathering. "All right, tell me the address, I'll get a ride there myself." "Would Annie Reeves like some?" Lance Carter asked, tilting his head. Annie Reeves nodded slightly. "I'll try some." These dumplings were specially made for her, she couldn't ignore Lance Carter's kind gesture. The translucent dumplings, upon touching her tongue, burst with a captivating, soft fragrance, truly tantalizing her taste buds, making her unable to resist having more than just a few. The second round of toasts began, and Lance Carter cheerfully clinked glasses with the director, downing his drink in one gulp. The meeting ended before 9 o'clock. The director suggested going for coffee or karaoke, but Lance Carter waved his hand dismissively, chuckling. "I have surgery today, and I slept in the car all last night. I can't keep up. Maybe another day." Bella West pouted, looking aggrieved. "Dr. Thomas Carter, you're not a child. Why would you obediently go to bed at 9 o'clock? Come on, let's go. I'm not a child, but compared to you, I'm older. Naturally, my energy levels aren't the same as yours. Have fun. Lance Carter deftly deflected Bella West's insistence, keeping her at arm's length. Fine then. Please take Annie home. Bella West rarely mentioned Annie Reeves. That's what I should do. Annie Reeves smirked, momentarily stunned, swallowing her refusal. Next, the group split into two, one heading to another bar, the other heading home. Bella West reluctantly said goodbye to Lance Carter. Having achieved this today, she could proactively ask Lance Carter out next time. Thinking about this made her feel a little better. Where do you live? Lance Carter opened the car door, looking calmly at Annie Reeves. Annie Reeves shrugged self-deprecatingly. It's on the way. Do you also live in Kevin? No, nearby. She sat beside him, very close. Having met twice, they could be considered acquaintances. Initially, she wondered if Lance Carter, having drunk alcohol, would be able to drive, but he drove steadily. Her stomach cramps were worse than during the day, but there were still only dark red spots. Surely nothing would obstruct the flow inside her body. Annie Reeves felt a flicker of fear, a tightness in her chest. The dumplings she'd eaten began to churn uncomfortably in her stomach. She couldn't help but cover her mouth, clutching her abdomen, and hunching over. Annie, are you cold? The headlights of an oncoming car illuminated Annie Reeves' pale face. No. The pain intensified, making it hard to breathe. She had to go to the hospital tomorrow. Could a bad mood cause menstrual cramps? Lance Carter pulled over, retrieving a jacket from the back seat and draping it over her. The jacket carried a refreshing mint scent, not of cigarettes or alcohol, but clean. Annie Reeves squeezed her eyes shut from the pain, her breathing ragged. Annie, should we go to the hospital? Lance Carter looked at her with concern. I think it's just fatigue. I'll be fine after some sleep. Annie Reeves tried to convey that it was just a normal bodily function. Lance Carter didn't say anything more, only accelerating slightly. Strangely, the stomach pain eased upon exiting the vehicle, yet while inside, Annie Reeves had been drenched in cold sweat, nearly fainting. She returned the jacket, expressed her gratitude, and bid farewell. Lance Carter, after briefly observing the old houses cloaked in darkness, called her back and retrieved 2 items from his car. Don't be so hard on yourself, a little relaxation isn't a bad thing. This is actually our 4th encounter, you just don't recall them. Lance Carter chuckled, waved goodbye, and got into his car. Annie, sleep well, sweet dreams. If you feel unwell, call me anytime. She watched in a daze as Lance Carter's car drove away, the streetlights casting a faint glow. Lowering her head, the red in her hand caught her eye. It was her marriage certificate with the deceased Victor Walker, returned to her by a stranger she'd met through Bella West. Suddenly, she remembered. Lance Carter wasn't Bella West's friend, he was the man at the intersection who almost hit her, the man at the massage parlor she'd mistaken for someone else. What a small world, no wonder he looked familiar. Annie Reeves smiled faintly, stroking the marriage certificate. Now, things were falling into place, divorcing Victor Walker would be straightforward. This was fate. What are you so upset about? See, that kind of person was just toying with you. He was never going to marry you. Ray Johnson's reckless words were cut short. Yvonne West looked skyward and sighed, unable to cry. Through a pane of glass, the onlooker, upon seeing Victor Walker enter, quickly buried their face in their computer screen, pretending nothing had happened. Victor Walker calmly entered his office, tapping his fingers on the desk, his mind restless and unwilling to work. Today was Monday, not Black Friday. Suddenly remembering his uncharged phone, he hastily opened the box, retrieved the device, plugged in the cable, connected it to the power source, and pressed the power button. A gentle melody chimed, and a butterfly fluttered across the screen. Moments after booting up, the screen blinked with incoming messages, over 20 of them. More than half were spam, a few from clients, none from Yvonne West. As Victor Walker read and deleted them, he noticed a message from his wife. Yes, that's right, she had asked him the other day if he'd received her text. Victor Walker opened the message and froze. Victor Walker, let's get a divorce. It was early Saturday morning when he was still in his office, having just smashed his phone. She wanted a divorce. She wanted a divorce. She wanted a divorce. Victor Walker's mind went blank, only able to numbly repeat this question. He reread the message, thinking he might be seeing things. No, it was undeniably real. Annie Reeves said she wanted a divorce, a concise message, timed perfectly, not about the clothes. Then what was it about? Victor Walker tapped his head, feeling his soul leave his body, turning him into an empty shell. This wasn't the outcome he desired. Had his actions crossed a line, pressuring her? Impossible. He hadn't even properly begun. It absolutely wasn't due to a third party, his commitment to Annie Reeves was unwavering. If they were to divorce, Victor Walker thought, it should reasonably be him who initiated it. He could provide her with anything she wanted, yet her attitude towards him remained consistently cold, a stark contrast to the passionate women he encountered elsewhere. But divorce had never been his intention. Was a husband like him truly unworthy? Over the past few days, he deliberately created the impression of another woman in his life, simply to gauge her reaction, to see how much she cared. He hadn't been overt, yet she chose to leave. For whose benefit was this performance, then? A pang of pain shot through Victor Walker's heart. How could she let go so easily? Not even putting up a fight. Had she been anticipating this day all along? Running away from home because of this? He hoped so, or he'd tear her apart. If she had suspicions, couldn't she have asked him directly? No, he absolutely wouldn't agree to a divorce. Whether initiated by him or by her. There was resentment, a lack of willingness, and a multitude of ambiguous, undefined emotions. If it was merely habit, and he currently had no intention of divorcing, then his wife certainly had no right to leave him. Victor Walker decisively deleted the message. If the phone was broken, then he would consider the message unread. But his heart couldn't maintain its composure. He had to admit, he was slightly hurt. Other women clamored for his affection, yet she continually pushed him away. Any man would be deeply affected by this. Victor Walker stared at his phone, his mood plummeting. There was a knock at the door. The pricing team leader entered. CEO Walker, the representatives from Tui Kien Construction are waiting in the conference room. I'll be right down. Victor Walker remembered his appointment with Tui Kien Construction to discuss the Changjiang Bridge tender. A wave of numbness washed over him. He stood, composing himself for a long moment before heading downstairs. William Carter muttered a curse, slamming his fist against the chair. That Naomi Bennett, she really puts her money where her mouth is. It has nothing to do with her, or anyone else. This is between me and Victor Walker. Annie. William Carter turned to her. Do you look down on me now, Annie? Thinking I'm the same, that I have no right to criticize Naomi Bennett? Annie Reeves swung her leg nonchalantly, remaining silent. There are many things I haven't said outright for the sake of appearances. Annie, do you know how Naomi Bennett became a manager at Tui Kien Construction? She slept her way to the top with the CEO. William Carter closed his eyes in pain. I knew she was ambitious, power-hungry, unwilling to be beneath anyone. I couldn't imagine she'd resort to such methods. Just like any husband with an unfaithful wife, I was the last to know. Back then, Tui Kien was facing difficulties, and I was on a business trip. I returned a day early, opened the door, and caught them in bed. Naomi Bennett and that CEO begged me. Naomi Bennett tried to kill herself, swore to me, spoke of her pain and suffering. Remembering our past affection, thinking she was just young and foolish, I forgave them. After that, Naomi Bennett did behave for a long time, and that CEO happened to be transferred, so I thought the matter would just fade away. A year ago, our relationship turned cold again. Outwardly, there was no sign of trouble, but we had been sleeping in separate beds for a long time. That's when I met Stella Clark. I admit I'm an ordinary man, unable to resist temptation, both emotionally and physically needing an outlet. Naomi Bennett found out, didn't make a fuss, said she was also sleeping with Victor Walker. So, we agreed to go our separate ways. I was almost scared out of my wits, cut off my relationship with Stella Clark. Our home was practically ruined, and I couldn't let her ruin our relationship too, Annie. I really tried, but I miss Stella Clark. She's pregnant, her family knows about us. I had no choice but to divorce Naomi Bennett, which ended up hurting you so badly. William Carter finished his last words, the corners of his eyes tinged with moisture. Annie Reeves continued to stare ahead, listening silently. Annie, say something. William Carter nudged Annie Reeves. Say what? I'm not as magnanimous as you, able to forgive someone who strayed. Whether it's emotional or physical, even once, I wouldn't forgive. There's nothing to regret, it's a kind of liberation. My divorce from Victor Walker has absolutely nothing to do with you two. The test results should be ready, I'll go check. She slowly stood up. Annie, do you hate me? William Carter's throat moved as he asked with difficulty. I have no reason to hate you, we can still be friends. Annie Reeves walked towards the elevator. Annie, should I go with you? You've already attracted enough attention, just leave me alone. She laughed, the elevator doors closing, hiding her heartbroken expression. William Carter stood stunned for a long time, at a loss, feeling that Annie's laughter was filled with pain. The doctor had also finished examining the registered patients, and the clinic was much quieter. Annie Reeves rubbed her fingers, sitting down opposite her, seeing her medical records and test results on the table. Do you have any other family in Tanjong City? The doctor asked gently. My mother lives not far from here, doctor. Do you know what's wrong with me? Annie Reeves' heart was in her throat. The doctor chuckled, your white blood cell count is a little higher than normal. Have you had a cold recently? Yes, I got caught in the rain and caught a bit of a cold, but I'm much better after taking some medicine. Actually, it wasn't a serious illness. You were pregnant. But don't be upset, the baby was fine, but you took so much cold medicine that you couldn't keep it. Pregnant? Annie Reeves' eyes widened in surprise. How is that possible? I just had my period. The doctor's smile faded, and he looked seriously at Annie Reeves. That wasn't your period, it was internal bleeding. You were pregnant, but the embryo wasn't in your uterus, it was in your fallopian tube. This is called an ectopic pregnancy. It could be. He stared at her for a long time, his insides twisting. He hated her calmness, her casual tone, her innocent expression. How could she be so careless? It was a life, not a flower or a blade of grass to be crushed. Victor Walker was nearly insane. You didn't just find out you were pregnant today. You knew it earlier, so you deliberately got drenched in the rain, then said you lost the baby because of the medicine. But the truth is, you didn't want it from the start. Annie Reeves, I thought you were just quiet and cold, a bit reserved, but I never thought you were so heartless. For a divorce, you really are willing to do anything. Are you sure you'll be happy and joyful after divorcing me? She looked at him in disbelief, her lips trembling, unable to speak, her body shaking uncontrollably. Victor Walker, it's not like that. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she tried to retort, but he coldly cut her off. Don't say anything more. I've always wondered why you suddenly came to me that day. You planned all of this. For 4 years, you refused to get pregnant, and when you finally did, you wanted to kill it. How could you pretend to be so innocent and tell me about it? You could have just taken care of it quietly. Victor Walker shook his head in despair, his face furious, his eyes bloodshot. What is there left for me to cherish, to hold on to with you? A woman like you, without humanity, I don't want you anyway. Fine, fine, divorce it is. I'll let you go. Okay. Annie Reeves nodded, not wanting to say anything more. There was no need. If Victor Walker loved her even a little, he wouldn't have said those things. The late autumn wind cut like knives, causing her pain. Her shoulder-length hair was disheveled, her heart icy cold. She could barely stand. When a man's heart has changed, nothing he says is unexpected. She smiled. Should we go to the Civil Affairs Bureau to finalize the procedures now? She asked. Is there a man waiting for you, that you can't even wait a little while? You're still carrying my child. Victor Walker sneered at her. She lowered her eyes and chuckled. The person waiting for me won't mind a little bit of time. I'm afraid Manager Bennett will be waiting impatiently. Don't bring other people into this. Victor Walker, provoked by her, lost his reason. Today, I've truly seen your real face. You're a cold-blooded animal through and through, incapable of warmth. Annie Reeves, you asked for this divorce, and I'll grant it. I, Victor Walker, standing right here, swear to you, I will marry a woman 100, 1,000 times better than you. I don't think that will be difficult. She was an ordinary girl, the kind you could easily pick up off the street. So when are we going to finalize the procedures? After my surgery. Annie Reeves nodded, pulling out the surgical consent form. This needs a family member's signature. Legally, we're still related. Please sign here. Staring at the surgical form she offered, Victor Walker recoiled as if burned. An abortion is a minor procedure. You can take pills. There's no need for such a drastic measure. I won't become an executioner like you. Call your mother. I won't be home for a few days, and we don't need to see each other again. 10 minutes are up. I have things to do. With that, he glared at her in disgust, pushed open the door, and stormed inside, his handsome face contorted with rage. The staff, having never seen him like this, were so frightened they barely dared to breathe. Annie Reeves sighed involuntarily, slowly descending the stairs. A woman with no shoulder to lean on, a bit pathetic. Mom, it's me. Forget the stock market, pack your bags and come to Tanjong No. 1 hospital. As soon as possible. Otherwise. She dashed across the red light, turning onto the side street, preoccupied with her call. Unaware, she stepped into a half-open manhole, lost her balance, and crashed to the ground. Though her limbs were scraped, she felt no pain there. Instead, a searing agony radiated from her lower abdomen, consuming her. A passerby helped her up, stunned by her paper-white face. Are you alright? Quick, call 120. She forced her eyes open, thrust the surgical form into the stranger's hand, and fainted. Victor Walker chuckled. A husband who earns money, provides for his family, and stays faithful, wasn't that enough to satisfy her? Divorce. She, at 27, would seek a second spring, a brighter future. He, however, had far more opportunities than her. 32, with a house, a car, a job, status, and looks. He wasn't narcissistic, but supremely confident. A man like him, radiating an undeniable aura, could have any woman he wanted. He would make her pay for today's actions, make her regret it with every fiber of her being. Victor Walker. The office door opened gently. Naomi Bennett, carrying a thermos, beckoned him. I heard you had a stomach ache. I made you some porridge. Victor Walker pressed his lips together, eyes narrowed, a cruel smirk twisting his mouth, as if Annie Reeves was standing right there. Take a good look, he thought, you're not the only woman in the world. Plenty of others are yearning for me. Why the long face? Naomi Bennett asked, shooting him an annoyed glance as she walked in and closed the door behind her. Did you and Annie have a fight today? You seem really off. Ah, you care about me. Victor Walker raised an eyebrow, arms crossed. Naomi Bennett flashed him a seductive look, then swiftly cleared the papers off his desk and opened a thermos. The enticing aroma of porridge filled the air. The way to a man's heart is through his stomach. The way to a woman's heart, well, that's her, kitty. These age-old truths have been tested and documented throughout history. Original meaning: the way to conquer a man is through his food path, the way to conquer a woman is through her ean path. Of course I care about you. Who else would I care about? She giggled, pushing him down into his chair. Victor Walker shrugged her hand off, spun around, and let out a cold laugh. He tilted her chin up. Why are you doing this? His demeanor shifted, becoming cold and detached. He unbuttoned Naomi Bennett's blouse, his hand quickly reaching inside to grasp her full breast, his gaze icy. Naomi Bennett trembled slightly, a small gasp escaping her lips. She had only intended a small gesture, not this sudden escalation. Why else would a woman care about a man? She didn't feign shyness, seizing the opportunity. Her body went soft as she wrapped her arms around Victor Walker's neck, pressing herself against him, rubbing gently, her eyes teasing. A strong, healthy man, holding a soft, young woman in his arms, fueled by resentment, Victor Walker's body reacted instantly, burning with a sudden fire. You know how I feel. I've liked you for a long time, it's just. I didn't dare say anything. She whispered, turning to breathe hot air into his ear, feeling his body stiffen. She was inwardly elated. The dance between men and women is like that, sometimes as difficult as climbing a mountain, sometimes as easy as flipping your hand. In the end, Victor Walker couldn't resist the beauty in his arms. You don't seem shy at all. Victor Walker, his blood pounding, his breath ragged, let her restless hands roam. He simply stared at her with a sardonic expression. Annie is still my friend, after all. I do feel a little guilty. Naomi Bennett's breath hitched, her body writhing uncontrollably. The mention of Annie Reeves was like a match to gunpowder. Victor Walker roared, his anger exploding as he roughly kneaded her breast. That cold-hearted woman isn't worth worrying about. His voice dripped with mockery, a dark smile playing on his lips as he looked at her. Victor Walker, hurry up. Naomi Bennett, lost in passion, urged him on. With a swing of her arm, the thermos flew off the desk, shattering on the floor with a crash. Shards of glass and spilled porridge scattered across the ground. Victor Walker stared intently at the chaotic mess on the floor, his body rigid. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Annie Reeves's surgery was complete. After an hour of observation, she was transferred to a gurney and wheeled out of the operating room. The green light above the operating room door illuminated. Lance Carter looked at her tenderly and sighed softly. Outside the window, the lights of countless homes twinkled. Among them were feelings of joy and warm prosperity, but also a sense of quiet sorrow for recent events. Not long after she left, Annie Reeves's phone, left on her bedside table, pinged with a message from Lance Carter. In the message, he recounted an amusing incident on his way to the hospital. His brief description made Annie Reeves chuckle and huff with laughter. If he had been overly anxious and solicitous, Annie Reeves would have naturally recoiled and become wary of him. But now, she felt that Lance Carter was a true friend, like a father and an older brother, figures she lacked in her life. How fortunate she was to have met him. After examinations and continuous 4 drips, the hospital room fell silent again. Susan Harris hadn't returned, and Annie Reeves worried that her mother might be lost. Perhaps due to the sedatives, she quickly drifted off to sleep. When she woke up and checked her phone, it was almost midnight. There were a few more messages from Lance Carter, unrelated to her condition, all written with his characteristic thoughtfulness. On her bedside table, a bouquet of flowers and a fruit basket had appeared, gifts from her colleagues at the Design Institute. And, oh, there was a young man standing by her bed, staring at her with a questioning look. "Are you Annie Reeves?" "Victor Walker's wife," the young man mumbled, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Can I help you?" Her voice was still hoarse from sleep. She hadn't washed her face or brushed her teeth, her hair was a mess, and she looked disheveled. The young man slumped onto a chair beside the bed, his expression saying, "So that's how it is. My name is Ray Johnson, Yvonne West's ex-boyfriend. A colleague had a baby, so I came to give her flowers." I overheard the nurses mentioning Annie Reeves. The name sounded familiar, and I remembered Yvonne West always talking about you. Curiosity got the better of me, so I came to take a look. Well, after seeing you, I've lost all hope. You don't look fierce enough to help me. Ordinary face, common figure, how can you possibly control a man like Victor Walker? Poor Annie Reeves pondered his words for a moment before understanding Ray Johnson's meaning, a mixture of amusement and exasperation washing over her. "So you were hoping I could help you?" "Yeah, I wanted you to keep Victor Walker in check, so he'd stop messing around with Yvonne West. Now, I can only sympathize with you. You can barely keep yourself afloat, let alone anyone else." His words rang true, and Annie Reeves conceded, "You're very much in love with Yvonne West." "Not really, I just can't swallow this." "Then why don't you keep her in check? She's an adult, how can I control her?" Ray Johnson raised an eyebrow, his teeth grinding. "True, an adult, grown up, how can you control them? You could tie her legs, cover her eyes, gag her, so she can't see, hear, or go anywhere. But you can't tie her heart. Her heart isn't with you, so nothing you do will matter. It's better to let go. Letting go of her is letting go of yourself. You should consider yourself lucky that you and Yvonne West aren't married yet. Breaking up now only hurts for a while. If you were already a family, with children, and then went your separate ways, wouldn't that be even more tragic? Much later, when you look back, it will all just be wishful thinking." Ray Johnson was astonished. "Whoa, listening to you preach like this, you're right. Why am I holding on to this? There are plenty of good women out there. I can't hang myself from one tree. I lose one tree, and a whole forest appears, I should be celebrating." He suddenly stopped, rubbing his hands. "So, what about you?" Annie Reeves looked up at the four-drip. "I'm waiting to be discharged." Ray Johnson left. Before leaving, he meaningfully dropped a line, "Victor Walker is blind." This gave Annie Reeves another headache. Tossing and turning, she saw Susan Harris shuffle in, her eyes swollen. "Mom." Susan Harris stared blankly at Annie Reeves for a moment, first helping her wash her face, wipe her hands, and change her urine bag before sitting down. "After breakfast, I was going to the market to buy a fish. The nurse said there's someone who cooks for patients behind the hospital. You've lost so much blood, you look like an addict, you need to be properly nourished," Susan Harris said, crying. "So, the fishmonger wouldn't sell you any?" Annie Reeves asked. Susan Harris shook her head. "No, I ran into your mother-in-law. He even drove to the riverbank to check out the bridge location, had lunch at a small restaurant near Key Veen, took a nap in his car, and then returned to the office." In the quiet office, an employee glanced at him casually, jerking his chin with a "take care of your health" gesture. This summer, Victor Walker's mother, Daisy Green, retired. She constantly called, urging him and Annie Reeves to come home for dinner, but everyone ran away after tasting her cooking. Sometimes Victor Walker truly admired his father for enduring such devastation for so many years. Daisy Green didn't smile, her face covered in a thick layer of powder. Are you waiting to be beaten before coming home? I'm waiting for work to finish, Mom. Sit down. Victor Walker poured himself a glass of water and pulled his mother down onto the sofa. Daisy Green coldly brushed his hand away. I ran into your mother-in-law at the market today. Victor Walker stiffened, his smile vanishing. What did she say? She didn't say anything. She ran away like she'd seen a ghost. Daisy Green's voice reached level 8. Victor Walker wearily collapsed onto the sofa, uttering an "aha." Don't you have anything to say? Daisy Green's anger soared as she glared menacingly at Victor Walker. He shrugged. Mom, go home and cook. I'll talk to you about this later. I'm working. Yeah, I believe you're busy. You're CEO Walker. You're nobody's son, nobody's husband. You've turned into a robot for work. If I could, I'd swallow you whole and put you back in my womb so I wouldn't have given birth to such a cold son. Victor Walker's face was tense, speechless. Daisy Green huffed, pursing her lips. Fine, your time is precious, I can't delay you any longer. I'm leaving. I'm going to the hospital to visit my daughter-in-law. She's still in the hospital. Victor Walker was slightly panicked. If not there, then where do you suppose she is? Out gallivanting? At work? Victor Walker, don't be so heartless. Even if you succeed, you're still pitiable. Because you were born to me, I can't speak harshly, I can only say I don't know how to teach you. Daisy Green shook her head in disappointment. Your father doesn't know about this yet, I'm truly afraid he'll beat you to death when he finds out. Mom, what the hell are you talking about? Don't tell me you don't know Annie's pregnant. Victor Walker didn't speak. So you knew everything Annie said was true. Daisy Green trembled with rage, unable to hold back, she raised her hand and landed a stinging blow across Victor Walker's face. Victor Walker looked up in stunned astonishment. In his memory, his mother had never hit him. Annie brought you the surgery papers to sign, and you refused, didn't you? He remained silent. Daisy Green tugged at his shirt, her anger unabated. Since when did your heart become so cruel? Don't you know you almost killed her on the street? If it had been half an hour later, you and she would be separated by life and death. Mom, what nonsense are you talking about? Can pregnancy be that serious? Daisy Green's shoulders trembled. Right, I'm talking nonsense, I really hope I'm wrong. Pregnancy also depends on what kind of pregnancy. Annie, it's an ectopic pregnancy, don't you know how easily that can kill someone? Boom, a bolt of lightning suddenly cracked across the clear sky, shattering Victor Walker into pieces. Every word from Daisy Green's mouth was like a buzzing bee, swarming chaotically before his eyes, back and forth, leaving him disoriented. So unexpected, ectopic pregnancy, such a foreign term. He remembered the surgical notice in her hand, how he angrily pushed it away without glancing at it, how he roared at her, saying he never wanted to see her again. Hadn't he almost indirectly killed her? That very night, he held another woman in his arms. God, what have I done? This is retribution, this is punishment. Victor Walker reproached himself, his heart constricting with pain until he could hardly breathe, his head felt like it was filled with water, his limbs stiff. I heard you two want a divorce, fine, even without this, I would advise Annie to leave you. Look at what good you are now. Victor Walker, where have you gone? Suddenly, Victor Walker shot out like an arrow, Walker the door open, and ran outside frantically. Towards the door, he strode, jumped into his car. He drove like a madman, the car hurtling forward as if pulled by 100 horses. He saw no red lights, no pedestrians, no scenery, only one sound echoed in his mind, Annie, 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 where are you? He raced to the hospital, burst into the maternity ward, and learned Annie Reeves' room number from the nurse's station. Reaching her door, his knees suddenly buckled, each step stiff and heavy. His mother said, just half an hour later, they would be separated by life and death. Half an hour, 30 minutes, 1,800 seconds, not long at all, short as a blink of an eye. The thought made him tremble, cold sweat soaking his shirt. Are you going in or not? Bella West, holding a bouquet of flowers, winked at Victor Walker at the door. Victor Walker took a deep breath, then another, wiping the sweat from his forehead. I'm going in. He was just a stranger. Had he really hurt her that much? The answer was undoubtedly yes. The young man glared at him contemptuously, called a nurse over, had a new urine bag fitted, and took the 4-drip away. Annie Reeves withdrew her outstretched arm. He saw the numerous needle marks, blue and purple, on her arm. It was understandable. Annie was thin, so it was harder for the nurses to find a vein, meaning more injections than usual to set up the 4. Heart aching, he sat down beside the bed and adjusted her blanket. Go back, she said. My mom's coming. You know how old-fashioned she is, she'll just say a lot of nasty things. He had done what he could go back now. And she really didn't want to see him. Misunderstanding or cold-heartedness, it didn't matter. At her most vulnerable, he had pushed her away and turned his back. That image was a knife, deeply embedded in her heart. She wasn't so forgiving, so virtuous, that she could pretend nothing had happened. It's okay, Victor Walker said, his voice trembling slightly. I'm not going back tonight. I'll stay here with you. This room is tiny, she said. There's no space for several people. Mom will take care of me. You have to deal with the company, go home and get some rest. Stop pushing me away, he suddenly roared. I know I was wrong. I misunderstood you, didn't look closely at the surgical papers, and put you through so much. You've given me a death sentence without even a chance to repent. We're still legally married, aren't we? He wanted to yell, to tear his hair out, to shake her awake and tell her he hadn't meant to do it. A bitter smile touched Annie Reeves' lips. Victor Walker, she said, it doesn't matter. Don't you think, we're just not right for each other? Then who is right for you? He asked, looking at her with fear, his voice a low growl. A hand gently patted his back. He turned around. Lance Carter looked at him reproachfully. He instinctively shuddered. Who was this polite, refined man? I'm Annie Reeves' doctor, Lance Carter, the man said. Today is her second post-operative day. She shouldn't talk too much right now. You're her husband, just back from a business trip. Victor Walker gave a strained smile and nodded, extending his hand towards Lance Carter. Lance Carter shook his hand. If it's a misunderstanding, then it's easier to talk about, he said. Don't agitate her too much, it'll hurt her wound. Then, he lowered his voice and spoke close to Victor Walker's ear. I think, right now, you should retract your sharp words and temper. Shouting won't be good for her. Whatever it is, wait until she's discharged. Does a doctor treat this kind of thing too? Victor Walker asked, his lips twisting in self-mockery. Lance Carter smiled, released Victor Walker's hand, clasped his hands behind his back, and bent down to look at Annie Reeves. His gaze was clear as glass. Annie Reeves raised an eyebrow at him uncomfortably and sighed helplessly. Everything's normal today. No post-op complications. Nothing to worry about, just focus on recovery. No 4 tonight, get a good rest. You too. Yeah. Lance Carter let his gaze linger on her face for a moment, then withdrew it, nodded to Victor Walker, and strode out of the room. Annie Reeves's eyes followed his retreating figure, a flicker of loss in her heart. Lance Carter's demeanor wasn't like a friend's, just a doctor's, and she didn't know how to act, it felt unfamiliar. Victor Walker sensed Annie Reeves's indifference towards him, but he didn't dwell on it. A patient's reliance on a doctor, like a devotee to Buddha, was a pure, untainted devotion. With Lance Carter's reminder, their argument paused. Susan Harris returned. Upon seeing Victor Walker, she didn't yell like Annie Reeves had feared, but glared at him with the hatred of an enemy, tears streaming down her face. This was more terrifying than any shouting. Victor Walker didn't need her to speak. He walked out, devoid of pride and courage to stay. Susan Harris followed him to the elevator. Don't come back. We clung to you, and look where it got us. Annie lost a fallopian tube. The doctors say she can still conceive, but she's half the woman she was. We all know it's over. You don't owe us anything, and we don't owe you. Susan Harris wiped her tears as she spoke. He gaped. Married to Annie Reeves for 4 years, he'd always thought that his mother-in-law could be appeased with a little money and a few gifts, her grin easily bought. Now he realized her acceptance of his gifts wasn't about the material things, but about acknowledging him, her family. If he weren't family, no matter how lavish the gifts, she wouldn't have spared them a glance. Victor Walker descended to the first floor in silence, walking and walking, somehow ending up on the main road. He paced back and forth, unaware of how much time passed, finally reaching a small restaurant where a few people sat drinking. He went in and ordered a bottle, drinking himself into oblivion before the food even arrived. She knew Victor Walker had truly confused love with pity. More than once, she'd wanted to suggest a divorce, but something always held her back, Victor Walker's kindness to her family. If not for recent events, she could have continued to endure. But now, she didn't need to. Each incident, like a sharp knife, severed the tangled mess, setting her free. It wasn't just about hurt, they were both lost. After parting, they would each find their own way. The past was past, she couldn't cling to it if she wanted a future. Having thought everything through, the hurried footsteps of the nurse on duty echoed down the hallway. Dawn broke, and the early sunlight glinted on the window bars, as if peeking at the world. 1 or 2 nameless birds drifted slowly past the window, quickly disappearing into the trees. She wearily closed her eyes, giving her overworked eyes a moment's rest. Early in the morning, the ward was already bustling with activity. The doctor made his routine rounds, Annie Reeves' 4 was removed, and Dr. Charles Ford suggested she try walking a few steps today, attempting some movement. Without the 4, Annie Reeves felt more comfortable, and starting today, she could have some porridge. The girl who had the abortion was discharged today, and the woman with twins went into labor early this morning and was taken to the operating room. Susan Harris helped Annie Reeves wash her face, rinse her mouth, tie her hair into a ponytail, and change into a sweater. Annie Reeves asked her mother to raise the bed so she could sit for her 4 and see more of the scenery outside the window. Susan Harris's cell phone rang. It was, undoubtedly, those old folks from her stock market group. After answering the call, her face lit up with an excited smile, and she occasionally sighed, simply enjoying the feeling. Annie Reeves didn't have the energy to ask many questions, just hoping to be discharged soon. Her mother should have her own life and not revolve around her. F929844 #D7, Lance Carter arrived carrying a large paper bag, wearing a gray sweater with a subtle pattern, looking both serious and vibrant. Lance Carter arrived carrying a large paper bag, his serious yet vibrant demeanor complemented by a gray sweater with a subtle pattern. Didn't sleep well last night. He set the bag down, looked at her, and frowned. I'll have to ask Dr. Charles Ford to give you more sleeping pills. There's a limit to how much a person can sleep. If I sleep too much during the day, how can I sleep at night? What's this? A special gift? She changed the subject. Annie, I'm transferring you to a VIP room. It's too chaotic here, not suitable for recuperation. That's making a mountain out of a molehill. People sicker than me can stay here, why can't I? Don't try to drain my bank account for the hospital's benefit. She tilted her head, pretending to be serious. Lance Carter was silent, staring at her so intently that Annie Reeves felt a shiver of unease. "Did you not wash your face properly?" Lance Carter shook his head and took out the items from the paper bag one by one: 3 large photo albums, an MP3 player, and 2 women's magazines, still in their plastic wrap, presumably newly purchased. "This album just arrived from Beijing. After you look at it, don't laugh secretly, be careful not to strain your stitches. The music and magazines are for tomorrow and the day after. You can only look at the album today." Seeing her eagerness to flip through the album, he held it down. She looked up and suddenly saw something restrained in his eyes, words lingering on his lips, his deep gaze holding her captive, a flicker of contemplation in their depths. The atmosphere suddenly became strange. She closed her eyes and opened them again. Lance Carter's usual warmth had returned to his face. "Do I need to give you my impressions after I look at it?" she asked playfully. Lance Carter arrived carrying a large paper bag, his serious yet vibrant demeanor complemented by a gray sweater with a subtle pattern. The two looked at each other and smiled. "Lance Carter, I'll treat you to a meal when I'm better." "All right, what's the price?" Equivalent to the price of 2 liters of blood." "Planning to be that precise?" "Well, the price isn't low then." Lance Carter's eyes twinkled with amusement. He knew she wanted to thank him for the blood transfusion, but this wasn't something a simple thank you could settle. Annie Reeves' face flushed, her nose wrinkling. "Then I'll pay in installments." "Lance Carter, thank you, for so very much." Lance Carter sighed softly. "Calling you foolish is an understatement. You really are foolish." The nurse from the specialized ward came looking for Lance Carter again, taking him away. Annie Reeves sat stunned for a moment, then slowly began flipping through the album. 2-year-old Lance Carter, a tiny row of teeth showing in a guileless grin, clutched a large ball. 8-year-old Lance Carter, missing his front teeth, lips pressed together, with the serious expression of a little adult. 16-year-old Lance Carter, already a handsome young man, with thick eyebrows and large eyes, talented and gentle. 20-year-old Lance Carter, beaming, hand in hand with a pretty girl, this must be his first love. 28-year-old Lance Carter, sitting in a park, a beautiful girl clinging to his leg like a small monkey on a large tree. 40-year-old Lance Carter, modest and refined, with a plane taking off and a corner of the capital's airport in the background. Annie Reeves flipped through the pages, a small smile playing on her lips. It was as if time had reversed, and she had lived through 40 years with Lance Carter in a flash. For some reason, she felt that Lance Carter at 40 was just as handsome as he was at 20 or 30, only his aura had changed, becoming more gentle and tolerant. From 30 onwards, apart from a little girl who looked just like him, no other woman appeared in Lance Carter's pictures, clearly a serious and traditional man. He said, "Fate, in life, if it's there, you can't force it, you can only wait." What kind of soulmate was such a man waiting for? Annie Reeves slowly closed the album. This only fueled Bella West's fighting spirit. "Hey, what are you doing here again?" Annie Reeves already agreed to step aside. "What more do you want?" "Let me tell you, I'll find the best lawyer for Annie Reeves. She can give way on the road, but in terms of money, don't think you can bully her." Bella West leaned against the car door, jingling her car keys. Victor Walker, carrying things from the car, looked at her unblinkingly as he walked towards her. "Bring this back to my place, or I might sue you for destroying another person's marriage." "Cut it out. Is there such a thing in civil law?" CEO Walker, don't tell me you're trying to pull a reincarnation act, thinking everyone still practices polygamy. Treating your husband like the sky, men messing around outside, and wives not allowed to have any resentment. Or do you see Annie Reeves as a Japanese woman, submissively saying, "Dear husband, if you have women outside, please use contraception first, don't get infected, and then slowly enjoy yourself." Ha, how ridiculous. "Sue if you want, I'm not afraid. I'm definitely helping with this." Don't go waving colorful flags outside while keeping the red flag flying high at home. Annie's divorce isn't a recent decision, she's wanted to leave you for a very, very long time. What did you say? Victor Walker turned his head, his eyes blazing red. Bella West shrugged, her expression saying, "You're so fake. Maybe it's because you have some dirty money, a bit of talent, and a few shameless women chasing after you, that you're so full of yourself. If you hadn't helped Annie Reeves's dad, she wouldn't have put up with you for this long." She couldn't help but shake her head, a hint of mockery in her voice. The muscles in his face twitched and contracted, his chest feeling like it had been struck hard. "Go home. Annie is recovering now. If you upset her, she'll cry. You two were together for 4 years, at least. Stop bothering her." Bella West finished speaking, turned around, her earrings still faintly shimmering, and went upstairs. Bella West's words were harsh and sarcastic. Victor Walker wanted to retort, but his heart ached, his throat felt constricted, unable to utter a single word. Something was stuck there, impossible to swallow or spit out. It was incredibly uncomfortable. He just stood there dumbfounded, the confidence he had when he walked out the door now reduced to zero. A day later, Daisy Green and Principal Dean Walker visited the hospital. Principal Dean Walker stood solemnly before the hospital bed, silent, but his eyes revealed an endless sorrow. Daisy Green kept pulling on Susan Harris, apologizing profusely, telling her to go home and rest for a few days, that she would take care of Annie Reeves. Susan Harris's mind was preoccupied with the stock market's fluctuations, but she still knew her priorities and flatly refused. Daisy Green and Principal Dean Walker left the hospital, their faces etched with shame. 2 days later, Victor Walker came to the hospital again. He had become noticeably thinner, with dark circles under his eyes, looking utterly dejected. Annie Reeves and Susan Harris were startled when they saw him. He didn't say anything, just poured water and peeled apples for her. He came and went as he pleased, each visit lasting about an hour, arriving unannounced and leaving abruptly without a word. In the following days, he came to the hospital every day. Susan Harris and Annie Reeves were a bit confused. Annie Reeves could now walk to the toilet by herself. Although she was still weak, she was recovering well. The woman who had given birth to twins, a boy and a girl, was no small feat, they cried loudly. Annie Reeves could lean close to the baby's crib next to her and had already been standing for an hour. Seeing her like this, Susan Harris turned away to wipe her tears. One evening, as dusk settled, Victor Walker came again, just when Susan Harris was out. The doctor took the twins to be bathed, and their parents followed to watch. The hospital room was extremely quiet. They spoke haltingly, cautious, as if constantly guarding against something. Each sentence was carefully considered before being uttered. Annie Reeves couldn't stand this unease and awkwardness any longer. She looked at Victor Walker honestly. The ectopic pregnancy, even if things were still good back then, would have required surgery. You don't need to feel guilty. It has nothing to do with you. I'm not angry with you. Anyway, I'm better now, Victor Walker. Go home and rest. You look like you haven't slept in days. Victor Walker stared blankly at her, eyes wide, as if they were complete strangers, as if he didn't understand a word she was saying. After a long silence, he began, "Who says it's not my fault? If it weren't for me, you wouldn't be pregnant." He bent down and pulled a small box from his pocket. It was almost dark outside, but the lights in the hospital room were still off. The hallway light spilled onto the floor, a bright circle, spinning and spinning, reaching Victor Walker's hand, reflecting the Japanese writing on the box. "Victor Walker, what are you doing?" Annie Reeves stared incredulously at the box of condoms in his hand. "Yvonne West's messages, the lipstick on you, the perfume, you kept it all for me to see on purpose, didn't you?" She opened her eyes, gazing deep into his. Victor Walker's eyes looked at her with a hint of confusion. "I thought it would make you pay attention to our problems. You thought I'd do what? Fight with another woman over you? Get jealous, stalk you like a thief? If I were really like that, I doubt you'd be acting this way. Suddenly, all the sadness seeped out of her eyes. She knew him well. He was used to being valued, not ignored, not tied down. Victor Walker, you're not making me pay attention to you, you're provoking me. If you cared about me, why would you let another woman disrespect, mock, and humiliate me? She stared intently at him. Who told you all this? Victor Walker asked tensely. That's all in the past. A bitter smile touched her lips. Victor Walker, to make me jealous, you even slept with Naomi Bennett? She didn't want to say it, but the words slipped out. Deny it, say it didn't happen, quick, quick. A tiny voice deep inside her screamed desperately. Her breath hitched, and she unconsciously clenched her fists. Victor Walker's lips moved, his face alternating between pale and flushed, he remained silent. Finally, a violin, so vibrant, fell silent. Your performance was quite the investment, too bad I don't appreciate it. His response to her was continued silence. He never would have dreamed she knew so much. How could he explain? Who would believe that nothing happened when a man and a woman slept together? He could only remain silent. She had finally calmed down, only to sit up again. He thought he was sacrificing so much, but his sacrifices were only for himself, never considering her feelings. He reached out and took her hand, saying, "Stop overthinking, okay? Annie, don't be angry anymore, I won't divorce you." "You won't, but I will." She coldly pushed him away. "You can hurt me, but please don't insult my intelligence. You say you don't want to sleep with other women, but do you know the consequences of this game of ambiguity? Don't shift the blame. If you didn't give them hope, how could they get close to you? Victor Walker, Naomi Bennett and William Carter divorced, Yvonne West and her boyfriend broke up, and now, I can't pretend nothing happened and continue living with you. You haven't adhered to the most basic principles of marriage. Victor Walker, don't say anything more, let's get a divorce." Victor Walker couldn't speak, like a thief caught red-handed, flustered and panicked, he bolted out the door. Annie Reeves turned her face away, biting her lip, tears streaming down her face. For several days, Victor Walker didn't show up. Susan Harris didn't press the matter. Instead, Daisy Green came every day, bringing a pot of soup, cooking something, chatting with Susan Harris, never mentioning Victor Walker. Principal Helen Brown had been back from Tianjin for a few days and today she set aside 2 hours to visit Annie Reeves in the hospital. She told Annie Reeves to rest and recover, not to worry about work. They talked about her illness for a bit, then about office matters. "Annie, you truly have a talent for engineering. It's a shame you don't like it," the principal chuckled. "Well, my university courses weren't bad either, I even received scholarships a few times. It was to make my dad in heaven happy, I prefer literature more. When you first started working, every day was stressful, drawing, designing, I originally intended to nurture you. But, one day while having lunch, I met your husband, and he specifically asked me if I could help you switch to a different job, saying that your literary skills were very good, and working in the literature department wouldn't be bad. After that, I observed you, had you write a few reports, and then transferred you to my office. My, how time flies, it's been 2 years already." The principal gently patted Annie Reeves. "Annie, I've been through it. Divorce, life for a divorced woman isn't easy. Every lonely night, licking bleeding wounds, shedding tears night after night, no one can imagine. Sometimes you even have to struggle to breathe, looking back, is it worth it? You're strong, so what? You're independent, so what? All that talk about embracing ambition. Everyone makes mistakes, forgive if you can. Don't casually utter the word divorce. Annie Reeves gave a faint smile in response. If it were before, she would have been moved by Victor Walker's concern. Now, she was just numb. If you're alive, you have to breathe, how can you not? Why are you so much like me? The principal sighed, standing up. Still, don't act impulsively, think it over some more. There aren't that many men in this world, the next one who comes along might not be the one you desire. Alright, who is Bei Bei's current boyfriend? What? The child is happy all day, dresses very properly, speaks softly to me, I wonder what line of work he's in. Annie Reeves smiled, remembering the type of man Bei Bei had described, her destined soulmate. I'll discreetly inquire for you. Good.